there were few things which would not strictly bracket itself into constellations. So we said that they would be our independent research initiatives. So there were three of those: Solidarities, Grassroots Action Program, and now Molding Methods. Because discussions around methodological contours of disciplines are not restricted to, let's say, one particular constellation, per se. The other sort of vertical of this was to really look at how we can overall, over time, look towards starting an academic program which could bring out practices of interdisciplinary learning, but also orient students towards it. So then we thought about the second half of the year of a Masters in Development Practice program, which is formally starting in August from the non-residential Taj facility. So we've been talking to Dr. Tanushree on this, which is about faculty members who've joined us. Some of them are here. About how a program like that can sort of work. There is also vision of an MRes degree, which is a research program that would come about. The only idea of sort of at this point for us was to think in terms of two spectrums. One, can we have conversations within and across constellations to talk about their own work? So yesterday was all about that. We've had not done regular ways of sort of sharing the work and projects that all team members are doing, principally because it's also very difficult to get everyone together, right? So the second day, which is day 2 today, we knew that it would be a sort of a close, sort of ended discussion on a number of thematic areas we could think potentially that could change or transform into constellations of their own. So we have a panel on agrarian studies, which is one of the things that I'm very keen in pursuing this year, which is to have a few villages closer in proximity, where we initially did at the center some field work with farming communities, but we didn't have the resources at the time to really sustain it. So it would be nice to also hear from your own disciplinary spaces about what you've been doing, where ideas can, as a space, collaborate. We have centers, we have institutes, but what I'm sort of largely looking now from a team perspective is to take this forward. Shivani and me, we have been talking about what we can do for doctoral students, not just JGU doctoral students or master students, but introduce writing as sort of a way of expressing yourself for many students who find that challenging. They're not taught and introduced to academic writing courses. So we want to be that space which, whether it's teaching, training, capacity building, or more importantly, in terms of research across areas, it's a platform which allows people to come together. So it's an annual thing. We will keep doing this with every year. The idea would be to evolve. But that's pretty much it. And we could just maybe get started. Thank you.
Yeah. So welcome everybody for the first panel of the second day of Swaroop. So firstly, thank you for coming here also on a Saturday morning. It's a weekend. And thank you to all the panelists as well for agreeing to be here and engaging in this discussion. So I think I don't need to really discuss, say much about the theme of interdisciplinarity per se. I think it's kind of obvious now that, it's a very important part, I think, of most of our teaching. And so I think this panel is very interesting for this discussion. Everyone here is doing very interesting work, in a sense, coming from a specific disciplinary background, but working in very different areas now. So with that, I'd just like to quickly introduce the panel here. We have Shivani Kapoor, who is here from the Center for Writing Studies, teaching across various schools on campus. And if I may say, also is essentially by training is a political scientist. So how do these insights come into the work? Then we have here Tanushree Sharma, who is a professor at the Jindal Global Business School and is also the executive director of the Center for Learning and Innovative Pedagogy. So it would be interesting to hear more about that. We have Ritam Sen-Gupta, who is, if I'm correct, a historian by training, but is teaching in the School of Art and Architecture here. So that should be, I think, very interesting insights will come in. And lastly, we have Mansi Rathore, who is teaching here at the Jindal Global Law School and is a philosopher by training. So all these different, so how I'd like to hear how all these disciplines meld together. So yeah, so each of you would have about 10 minutes to speak. So why don't we start with Shivani? Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that, Dipanshu and Shamin, and thanks for this invitation to come and think with you about not just interdisciplinarity, but also the work that we do every day, where there are very little chances that one gets in the middle of teaching and everything else to think about and reflect on the work that one is doing. So thanks for that. Like Shaman said, I'm a political scientist by training and by research also. Um, and here I teach at the Center for Writing Studies, and today I'll talk a little bit about that actually, and how is the center organized, who are the people there, what is the work that we do, and how do we see ourselves in this conversation of interdisciplinarity or multi or transdisciplinarity, whatever terms we choose to call it. The center, and for the Jindal people here, this is, I think we need to clarify this. The center is a teaching center. It's not like the other centers, which are research centers. So that's one major sort of difference in the way that we work. It's a question of terminology that we were called a center and not something else, not an institute or a school or something else, but that's more a sort of institutional conversation. So it's a teaching center. We have 12 faculty on board right now, ranging from lecturer to professor, and all of them come from a range of disciplines. So there is sociology, anthropology, comparative literature, political science, there is education, there's international relations. And what is very striking about this, if we look at writing centers in India, very few of them, but also writing centers across the globe, I think what is very unique about the Center for Writing Studies here in Jindal is that is its interdisciplinarity. So usually around the world, writing centers are thought of as centers which teach English, or not English literature, but teach the English language and teach writing in the English language, and are populated by faculty who are trained in English. Here we are doing something very, very different. In fact, we don't have many people except maybe a couple who are trained in teaching English, which is also helped by the fact that we have an English language center in Jindal, which is a separate entity which has people who are trained in teaching English as a second language. And so with that division, we get to, in the CWS, we get to then think about writing from a sort of disciplinary perspective. And that's another kind of way in which some writing centers across the world have thought about writing, which is writing through the disciplines, which is the idea that how an anthropologist would write about the state is going to be overlapping but also distinct from how a political scientist is going to write about the state, versus how, say, somebody who's looking at aesthetics is going to write about the state, and so on and so forth. So every discipline in this idea, every discipline has its own conventions, its own vocabulary, its own codes, and one must learn that. And while we talk about interdisciplinarity, like Shaman said, the rootedness has to come from one particular discipline, essentially, right? So every discipline has its own codes, vocabulary, debates, ideas, and so on and so forth. And writing from the disciplines, this idea understands that one needs to learn that. What we do at the center then is that we all come from these very sort of rooted disciplinary and research contexts. All faculty members do their own kind of research as well in their own disciplines, in their own research areas. But when they come to teach writing, they really think of not just their disciplinary position, but also the disciplinary position of the classroom that they are in, right? And which is where what Shaman was saying, I think CWS is the only teaching entity in this university which teaches across 8 schools. And so we are essentially teaching across 8 disciplines, including we teach in the PhD program, and the PhD classes are multidisciplinary by their very nature. So in the first semester, all PhD students of the university do 5 common courses, one of which is academic writing. And so we teach in single discipline classes, like say a BA political science class, or a BA in global affairs class, or a BA in economics class. We also teach in the masters, we then teach in interdisciplinary BA classes like in JSAA, where there is a mix of interior design, architecture, and urban design kind of students coming together. We then also teach in interdisciplinary master's programs like public policy, MADLB, which is diplomacy, law, and business, which again is inherently interdisciplinary by nature. And then we teach in the PhD program, which has everybody from business to law to political science to IR coming together in one class for one kind of training in academic writing. So what is very interesting in the way that CWS is currently working then is that while we approach writing and reading from our disciplinary perspectives and those of the class. So if I'm teaching a BA sociology class and I come from political science, at one level, that one negotiation needs to happen. You know, what do the students want to learn and read this semester? Sometimes they might say, we are very bored of sociology texts. Can you teach us something different? You know, your discipline would be nice. Happens a lot in economics, happens a lot in law, where students are like, we do this in all our other courses. Can you please teach us some anthropology? Or there are disciplines, especially at the master's level, where students will say, oh, we can't divert. So no, we don't have the time and the energy to look at another text or another discipline right now. Can you please teach us something from international relations, right? Or from public policy? And so that's one level of interdisciplinary pedagogy that we do between our discipline and the class that we've been placed in that semester. It's not always a neat combination that I will only teach political science. The other level of interdisciplinarity, which is very, very interesting for us, is because there is no set writing pedagogy in India or in the world. In the world, what we have is, like I said, those programs where English is taught as a second language, or there is basic sort of, what the US universities call the 5-para essay kind of thing, but we are doing so much more than that in our classrooms, and those models don't really work for us here. So because there's no set pedagogy, there's no syllabus that we fall back on, here in 7 years of CWS, we've really learned from each other's classrooms. And so whatever occasion we get, we also then, the faculty also sit down and talk to each other, look at each other's repertoire, look at each other's classrooms, and learn by practice and see what is it that we are doing, right? So we could have a sociologist on board who is then sort of trying to understand how can I bring in poetry into my class, and taking help from other faculty who are trained in, so we have a faculty who's trained in creative writing, and we might take help from them and say, okay, so here is a bunch of students who's not very interested in reading a 30-page essay, or they are not being able to read a 30-page essay. What can I do, right? We also have other kinds of examples. I mean, Ritam is here, and we've done this in JSA quite a lot, where the architecture students work a lot with materials. They work a lot with objects. They work a lot with descriptions. And one feedback that we've always got from JSA is, teach them how to write good descriptions. Now, we never thought that those of us who are trained in sociology or anthropology will find it very interesting to teach in JSAA, because descriptions is what brings us together, right? The thick description idea. Some of us, so it's, you know, every semester that we do it, we discover these little linkages where we find that some part of our training is helping this set of students, and so on and so forth. So it's many levels and layers of interdisciplinarity that CWS functions on. And a lot of this impulse comes from our students, who constantly then challenge us and ask us questions and say, "Oh, this is what we want to learn and that is not what we want to learn." So that's one kind of experience we have had. Yeah. And I think I can say more when the discussion happens. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you, Shivani. And first of all, thank you, Professor Dipanshu, and thank you, Shamin, for inviting me here. So I would take your liberty to travel through times and places before coming down to my own center and what we aspire to do here. So some of my historian friends and scholars of history have told me that Renaissance, which led to the modern world, actually created all breakthroughs through collaborations, right? They said artists studied anatomy, political thinkers studied philosophy, right? Scientists used mathematics. So Renaissance as a period is not only a benchmark for creative excellence that was achieved in that period, but also a testament to the importance of people coming together to create something huge, something groundbreaking. Now, this particular phenomena has also been captured by Johansson. He's written a book, The Medici Effect. And in that book, he talks about, why these earth-shattering or groundbreaking breakthroughs or innovations happen at the crossroads of disciplines. And he, in a way, argues that, when people come together, they gather together, cross-pollination happens, and the ideas that emerge there cannot be generated or cannot emerge if a person remain glued to one's own disciplinary identity or knowledge. It's very important. Now, this thing has become all the more important now, given the kind of challenges we are facing. Artificial intelligence is the newest of all. We have been talking about climate change for ages now, social equity. I really don't know since when. So, if you look at these challenges, what they call for creative thinking. They call for, very extensive understanding of different disciplines to come out with some solution which can address these wicked problems, as we call them, which is very difficult to be solved. So, and I would not be surprised if there might be a connect between what the World Economic Forum time and again emphasize on, that is inculcating the new age skills among students, which we also call as, the 21st century skills like creativity, collaboration, critical thinking. Now, all of these skills actually, combination of this would call for an innovative mindset. That is very, very essential. So now we are looking from the perspective of what we are here for, what we are here to, achieve. It's not only to teach, but to ensure that our students learn these skills. Our students are able to imbibe or inculcate these skills. The industry has recognized it long, long ago. That's why they always talk about innovative mindset. Whether you talk about Google, you talk about Apple, or any industry for that matter, right? If you remember Steve Jobs, there's a very famous quotation of Steve Jobs. I'm sure you must have read about it or heard about it before. I quote, he said, "Technology isn't enough. It is technology married with the liberal arts, technology married with the humanities makes our hearts sing." And that is so true. So everything is happening, right? as Dipanshu, Professor Dipanshu has rightly said, that this is nothing new. We have been talking about this for ages now. What about academics? What about higher education? What about educational institutions then? So there is a lot of research, and there is one famous study also by Harvard Business Review, in which they studied thousands of research papers and kind of reached to a conclusion that those papers which use some multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary approach to respond to their research question, right? They were heavily cited, or they were likely to be cited more, and also drive innovation. And when it comes to teaching and learning, there is this cognitive science and cognitive psychology which we talk about. And it says that when a person is exposed to multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary, I would not yet get into the transdisciplinary thing yet, that they are able to form deeper connections in their memory. The chunks, they become bigger, and there are more connections which help them develop these skills like critical thinking or creativity better, which is all about connecting the dots. So if that is the case, where are we and what are we doing? It actually calls for a serious introspection first. Though at our university, one thing's come, very naturally to us. That is multidisciplinarity, because we have different schools, right? And if we look at each school also, mine is a business school. Ideally, we should only talk about business. But then we also teach our students sociology, psychology, philosophy. So this multidisciplinary is rooted, and it is rooted within each school, right? Yes, we do have cross-electives. Now, you would say these cross-electives actually are interdisciplinary. I'm sorry to say that. We still are a little away from making our cross-electives even interdisciplinary. Our cross-electives are just those electives which are primarily designed by one faculty for their own cohorts, for their own school. And we think, fine, these students might also like to read it, no harm, opening it to them also. So if that is the case, then it still remains multidisciplinary and not interdisciplinary. It will become truly interdisciplinary if faculty members from two different schools, they come together to create a new course, right? Environmental economics, so on and so forth. There's so many things coming together, brainstorming, and merging these two together to address a problem. It's only when you generate some kind of pedagogical innovations, you will actually let that disciplinarity come in, right? So devising innovative assignments which mirror real world, as we were talking about it, which would actually invite students to think of different discipline to address them. Bringing environment and economics together, as I just said, bringing AI and psychology together. So those kind of things, we actually need to give a serious thoughts to the way we are crafting, we are evolving our cross-electives. That would be the first point. And I would rather say that there is one thing which is more practical that we can do that. Since I'm a student of pedagogy also now by choice, I look at these things through a very critical lens. So within the school itself, there is a possibility which we are not seizing. And that possibility is creating these assignments. Right. No problem. Please make yourself comfortable. It's absolutely fine. So I was just talking about this interdisciplinary thing. First thing is to revisit the way we create and evolve our cross-electives. Secondly is, let's look within each school now. See, our idea is interdisciplinary, ensuring that different disciplines merge. So when I look at my own school, I'm just citing one example. We are working in silos, and it's not true only for JGBs, it's true for any other school for that matter, right? Even courses don't speak to one another while evolving their courses. I'm not talking about silos in some other sense, but then silos in terms of, the pedagogical collaboration. Two courses can come together to create one nice assignment, right? Learning does not happen just by sitting in the class and, absorbing some content or discussing about it. Learning happens when they work on some project also, which is like experiential learning, which is all the more effective. Right? So can two courses come together and design one common assignment for students? Now this would also lessen the load of students, and they would have more time to devote to complete that particular assignment, and hopefully they should be able to do it better, right? Rather than just looking at it on the surface, dig a little deeper, because they have to merge two things together. Fine. HR can partner with, for that matter, finance to design one assignment, but real assignment, not for the sake of developing assignment for grading students. So we need to, again, go back and look at the purpose, why we are doing what we are doing. And if there is a need to do something differently, why? And then we need to come to how. So that is the first step. And then would be, collaboration between and among schools in form of, cross-electives, or maybe, the way you were doing, I was going through the outline, which was kind of shared with me. Your program in development studies look like that, right? We try to make it more interdisciplinary in nature. So, and incidentally, what is, just last 1 minute, I'll quickly complete it. So, incidentally, it has so happened that we created one workshop for our colleagues from JSPC, right? And the title of, or the theme of, rather, the program was developing innovation mindset, or innovation mindset in education. It actually calls for, number one, challenging the status quo. And before challenging the status quo, it is very important to create a sense of urgency. We are not realizing it. Realization perhaps is there. We are all aware, as Shaman has rightly said in the beginning, the realization is there, the awareness is there, we all know about the importance, but the sense of urgency is missing. Right? There's no urgency. There's still this very traditional and conventional way of teaching that is happening. So we need to create a sense of urgency, and that's where my center can pitch in. Conducting workshops where we encourage faculty colleagues to challenge the status quo. And challenge the status quo is not only about challenging something which is external to you. The set-in systems and practices and policies and procedures and whatnot. Challenging the status quo is also challenging your assumptions and paradigm and your comfort zone. Because if you want to do things differently, you need to move out of comfort zone. And then we can talk about pedagogy then, which could be problem-based learning, which could be project-based learning, which could be phenomenon-based learning, which has already been started by some of the schools in, if I'm not wrong, either Norway or Finland. So, and, the workshops like this, I'm not workshop, but the roundtable kind of thing that we are doing, perhaps, are a good start to initiate that internal dialogues. So congratulations to you, and with this I end my introductory little long remarks. So thank you for being patient. Over to you.
So yes, thank you Shivani and Tanushri for that. Very interesting things. We have quick 5 minutes for discussion, but before I throw it open to the floor, I'd just like to point out two things that I found striking in both your talks. So from Shivani's talk, I found that point very interesting, that you're also truly interdisciplinary in the sense you're spread out across so many schools, constantly having to, in a sense, innovate with your pedagogies. So, but the interesting point was that it is useful to come from the rootedness in a particular discipline, and then from there move into engaging with others. I think a rootedness is very helpful, and then from there it kind of gives you an anchor to move forward and become interdisciplinary in a sense. And of course from Tanushrie's talk, which is I think very useful, was you're suggesting actually practical steps towards how we can even think of bringing in interdisciplinarity in our research and teaching as well. And what struck out to me was when you brought about when one of the examples that you mentioned was that even technology and the humanities they're always speaking to one another, whether it's realized or not. So in fact, that reminds me that there's still that one major frontier that we are yet to break through somehow, is actually interdisciplinarity between the social sciences and the physical or natural sciences. That reminds me, yes, we have seen some remarkable figures in the past, but it is by and large, these two worlds are separate. So these are just some thoughts that I have, and maybe I think we might have time for like one question or a response or comment from the audience.
I'm so glad that the conversation is happening in this regard. So I think the next step and I think this was something which Sherman and me spoke. If you remember, Sherman, we were having these sort of internal dialogues. So one of the things we haven't, I would say, successfully done so far is engage with schools about the nature of interdisciplinary learning and work that they are doing, not just let's say in research per se, but in terms of teaching. Everybody is trained. If I'm been trained in economics when I was teaching law students, and then now in a cross elective I have students from art and architecture, journalism, and you're teaching a course in political economy, introduction to political economy. How do you make sense, to students coming out from so diverse groupings? So is there a way or a platform where teachers can also sort of discuss about what methods or what steps they've taken, which I think helps a lot in looking at the cross-elective question, which you mentioned. But one of the things I was sort of also looking at, and I think I'm glad Shivani, I think, spoke about this as well, which is on having a team of people and them reflecting on what they are doing, and then having a space within to sort of co-learn, co-teach, so with the program also we've made sure, this is also the academic program committee's vision, that most faculty teaching a course are co-teaching, right? Even if it's a master's program in development practice, there might be certain core deliverables, but you do incubate that at the very beginning. I'm not sure if that's a sustainable long-term plan, but you wanted to start off like that. So what would be interesting to do is, through the center perspective, right, is to look at the possibility of what ideas can do. We generally plan our activities in terms of workshops or events semester in advance, so we could really think about this together instead of constantly asking constellations that you're proposing. And Sherman organized this exceptional series around history of economic thought, which I felt had such a interesting space to bring scholars from different areas. But you already have, let's say, a consortium where there are minds who are thinking of those questions. Here, I think we could create that space where those conversations start. So I think at the center to sort of ideas level, I would probably say that might be a good sort of a beginning. We could now move in towards branching that collaboration. Happy to sort of talk about this at length, but I think this is good that we are sort of looking at. I'm also looking forward to comments from Rhythm, because that's one space as a school, I believe we've not really engaged. And I was telling Jaideep about this, that this is something we need to work over this semester. Thank you.
Would you like to any one quick response?
No, go ahead, please.
No, just thanks for that, Dipanshu. That's giving me ideas already. I'll talk to you about it. But going back to something Shaman said, and I think that's very important, right? I mean, you didn't pose it as a question, but to me it sounded like a question. Is rootedness in a discipline necessary? You know, so I can talk about hiring experience in CWS, for instance. We found out eventually after a couple of rounds of hiring that inherently people applying to us or interested in having some sort of a conversation with us were people who were anyways exploring interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary ideas in their own work and research. So sometimes we've been interested in hiring someone who's like a core economist or a core political scientist, and they don't want to do this. It's scary for them. It's also unsure for them as to what would it mean to actually then teach not your discipline, but teach your discipline through writing or reading, right? So we found that people who want to do this are anyways thinking interdisciplinary. And so all of us in the center then, while we are in some discipline, our researches are going in, or our interests are going in many, many directions. And I think that's somewhere helping us to then say, okay, we are not teaching sociology or economics, but we are teaching writing, and through that teaching the discipline. So that, I think, is interesting to think about, how that happens.
So basically, I have a friend whose name's Arushi, and she's in JGBS. So obviously, we choose electives, and for our upcoming semester and all. So she basically chose a elective, which is basically for a postgraduate course, which is basically specifically towards that. I'm just adding. There's no question here though. So what happened was I asked her, maybe the exams which will happen, the assignments that will come up, that will be of that particular level. But what you guys are talking about, I think it genuinely makes sense, and the implication or the practicality of it will be much more impactful with the ideas and the collaborations that you guys are talking about. Also because of the fact that the youth is ready to do it. And she told me that, I think it'll be good for her because it was she's interested in psychology, but she's studying business. But then the fact that you talked about like how what is the beauty of it, and collaborating on humanities and social sciences and all the other things. So I think that is beautiful, and I can now also understand as a student that yes, that this is something that can proceed forward. And because I was very scared that how will she do it, but then we started discussing on disorders, that okay, what if our own family has one, or there is a student in a workplace specifically who's having something, and you're able to help out there. So I think that's a beautiful idea, ma'am. That's it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Now, I'm glad that at least we heard a student voice here. And reflecting on what you said about rootedness in one's discipline, see, we actually need to do one more thing. It is almost sound like a paradigm shift, moving that spotlight from teaching to learning. That is extremely important. Otherwise, what is happening is we have compartmentalized knowledge. Right, but when we look at students, they need knowledge. For them, it is not one discipline, second discipline, third discipline. For them, they're acquiring knowledge to deal and navigate with the future lives. Right? So we perhaps need to shift our focus from only teaching or, covering certain course to more of learning, keeping in mind the future lives of our students. So that's that. Over to you. Thank you.
No, thanks a lot for those responses, and for both your talks. I think it's opened up a whole plethora of questions for us to really figure out from this. And I like this point about you're thinking from teaching to learning, actually, just shifting the perspective there. Okay, anyway, with that, I think I'd hand over to the next two speakers. Ritam, please go ahead.
Hi, thanks to Ideas for having me here. I have started teaching here a year back, and it is a kind of interdisciplinary program which our dean is trying to propose at JSA, primarily organized around sort of two maybe sort of thematics. One is sort of referring to a broader entity called the built environment instead of just buildings or architecture, that sort of thing, which now includes a program like a BA program, BDES program in immersive digital environments as well. So that's got to do with AR, VR and things like that. And there's an interior sort of program. And sadly, the urban design program is now wrapping up. And there's a regular architecture program. And more broadly around, something which is sort of referred to in the department as making, which is again taken as a very broad thing, which can cover everything from writing a paper or doing research to actually sort of more conventional ways in which we understand making, so designing something and the like. Now, how it is working out, I'm too early to kind of comment on that. But obviously, there's a degree of resistance you face in class because I am trained in, the humanities and social sciences. So that's the best I can offer. Though often the department makes other demands of having to teach them somewhat more technical things. Like technical things, as in that's also an interesting sort of. So technical things would refer to anything ranging between quite complicated software like SketchUp or whatever, but like, or SketchUp is probably not that complicated, but also, I've actually not been asked to do that, but some of the courses then you're supposed to teach you think that you would rather know these things. So you need to upskill as a faculty yourself. So anything between like, sort of the softwares to kind of, just documentary filmmaking, there's a lot on the plate which could be offered to the student. In terms of, just, it's understood that you won't go in very depth over it, but it's offered as a kind of skill set. Now, again, as I said, I can't quite comment yet on what this will lead to. I can see one sort of, one outcome is that I think students are taking up various things as they go along, right? Like when after they finish the program, which is partly got to do with the fact that as some of the more core architecture faculty have briefed us, it's not very, it's not a very kind of, architecture is not immediately a very good paying prospect as a career. Immediately when you enter, it's a bit like law. You start off in a kind of very junior role and eventually you make a earning proposition out of that. So as a result, this sort of multi-skill set sort of things that some of the JSA students are hopefully passing out with, it's likely that it leads them into some sort of policy work, some sort of writing work, design of various different kinds, etc. Now I'll sort of in the sort of brief time. So I have been thinking about it on a more general sort of prospects. I have studied in multiple disciplines, but I identify quite strongly as a historian in a disciplinarian sense. So it does make me curious of sort of my role here and what am I doing, but also more importantly, what are the conditions of possibility, right, within which I'm functioning. So I'll kind of finish by saying a few things about that. So it does seem like there is relatively, so interdisciplinarity, as Tanushi was pointing, has a very long sort of history. The history of disciplines, especially sort of academic disciplines, is relatively new, well, 300, 400 years. And that clearly in the present or for some time now has relatively less use for kind of nation-state project, right? So disciplinarity typically was a kind of citizenship building project for the nation-state all around the world. Also in post-colonial nations, but we can be less sure about. I mean, Sharmin will know very, like, she knows this much better than, like, so economics itself, like the planning commission was not always economists in sort of, early independence India, etc. So that kind of thing is already in post-colonial nations, maybe there's a kind of drift away from interdisciplinarity from disciplinarity, strictly speaking, as a citizenship building exercise. And that sort of drift away has seen a generalization maybe in the, I don't know, last 20, 30 years. You can say this as a kind of post-liberalization phenomena. And, well, I'm not looking back nostalgically at, well, this sort of citizenship building thing, but it's just something we need to take into account, that we are in a particular historical situation where interdisciplinarity, just minor disagreement with Tanushree. It's not simply an element of innovation. It's something which comes to us from the outside as well, like, from outside our discipline, from outside the university, from the market, from other sorts of forces. Which again, what do you do with it? Like, and so in history, for instance, there's been sort of, well, all of you will know about it, and it's quite regularly discussed in the public forum, etc. So there's a claim on indisciplinarity or interdisciplinarity, whichever you call it, from the kind of right. But there's also a claim on it from sort of subaltern groups who felt underrepresented in the sort of history curriculum, but also within the modernist kind of scope of even progressive universities like JNU, etc. So that is a situation within which we are working. So there's a kind of pull on this from the outside, the market or the state in different ways. But there's also like sort of political forces which are making a claim on fragmenting disciplines. So that is where we are at. Now, just to kind of leave out the politics for now, it can go anywhere for that matter. But in the context of the limited sort of thing I have been engaged in JSA, as I said, there's quite a bit of resistance from students to enter in this reflexive, this sort of reflexive relationship with making or built environment or whatever, where you say, okay, well, there's a history to it, there's a politics to it, and saying, so what? So I can't completely, I can't completely tell them so nothing, but this is important, etc. And kudos to Joydeep to keep bringing in people like me into the department to teach them this kind of stuff. But I think I don't want to be too cynical, but what this seems to lead up to is this kind of, and again, that is also a condition of our times more than just an element of innovation, that kind of, like you take, this is the thing, like a skill building is what we are eventually, kind of we are sort of, yeah, well, we're sort of now as pedagogy is sort of, we can't help but do this purely skill building exercise often, even when we are apparently engaged in something slightly different, knowledge building, that itself has its politics, skill, knowledge, head, hand difference, etc. But the head hand difference now seems to work, like, in a sense, the head hand difference was sort of especially in this sort of a situation, our caste society, etc. The head taking preference over the hand can mean a kind of, a dominance. But the irony, and I'll finish with this, I'm sorry. The irony in my sort of context is that when I push what is apparently the function or faculty of reflection in terms of, well, what is the power element to this or something, there is a very clear kind of resistance from students about the fact that tell us more about how to make, how to both go past this in terms of making do, but also making past it. This is a challenge. I mean, this is definitely something I deal with in class every day. So I'm not saying the students are wrong, I'm right or something, but that's the kind of challenge I face. And yes, if I could think closely with ideas about this, it would be great. But I'm very early in this, so I don't have too many kind of, things to.
Hi. So yeah, I'll also try to wrap it up quickly. I'm gonna, pick up cues from what others have spoken about in the panel, beginning with Shivani's point on, as a center, and I've had prior experience of working with CWS as well, and I felt, there was a greater genuine sense of collaboration that was fostered as a teaching center there, that I feel also encouraged, in a very organic sense, the interdisciplinarity aspect. And through that experience of, the workshopping methods within CWS and acad writing, I was able to, kind of implement them onto my other kind of courses that I end up now teaching within JGU. Even though I'm technically under law school as a philosopher, I've taught now courses in JGBS of Introduction to Philosophy, and that was a challenge. Even though I seem to be very excited initially, I get to do my own discipline, but in a school like JGBS, and thankfully there was another faculty, and again, through genuine collaboration and shared interest, designing of the curriculum, for such a curriculum around, for instance, like philosophy for business school students. Then we ended up modifying it to, for instance, focusing on certain thematic areas, and then bringing in certain aspects of for how is it relevant to business school students, whether at corporate epistemology, business ethics, looking at those instances from certain philosophical frameworks, whether it's virtue ethics or deontological ethics, etc. Also, during that course, we did try to do something like designing of assignments, like Tanushri also emphasized on, right? Not really up for students. And that's one challenge within interdisciplinarity, I feel, especially at these introductory level courses at undergrad, right? Students coming perhaps from a lack of familiarity within those disciplines. I cannot be expecting them to have these understandings of conceptual philosophical frameworks such as the analytical tradition or the continental tradition. I have to make it contextualized to their aspect. And that's where my question then comes, that perhaps I also somewhat sympathize with that fact that there is perhaps got to be some level of this disciplinary rootedness to then perhaps move on to interdisciplinarity, and especially if it's at entry level or introductory level or undergrad courses. Because when we talk about convergence of disciplines, yes, of course, social sciences provides a very fruitful playground for convergence of disciplines. But an example Shaman had given, it'd be interesting to something like with the natural sciences and the social sciences, right? I mean, it would be difficult for me to imagine somebody like a post-structural linguist trying to converge with or come together with like a positive biologist trying to work on something like a unified, because there's also certain methodological differences in terms of vocabulary of disciplinary training, and that's essential as well. Unless both these scholars revise their own disciplinary vocabulary and frameworks, it would be difficult to come to a single unified research project in that sense. So there is a limited sense of commensurability within these disciplines, which kind of also dictates across which disciplines there can be greater cooperation or collaboration as opposed to not amongst others, so to speak, right? In terms of research, I find myself, I know I am a political philosopher, clearly looking at, understanding or conceptualizing political ideas and concepts from philosophical or normative frameworks. Now, even within that space, there is debate whether political philosophy deserves a discipline or and it's not just about semantics anymore, right? There are greater questions, like Retam also perhaps mentioned, on the politics of interdisciplinarity too. Clearly, we have now new disciplines which are coming up or which have been coming up, which have now also served as mechanisms for exclusion as well as inclusion. So one needs to be cognizant of that fact as well. So if I take the example, like I'm interested in post-war justice and humanitarian intervention in terms of research, right? Yes, there can be greater sense of collaboration between somebody from political philosophy or an IR scholar, so to speak. But how are we to then determine, should we also require the engagement of a legal expert or a scholar? Right? Should it extend itself beyond political philosophy and IR onto the legal domain as well, or not? Or is it just the rebranding of certain disciplines as certain identities? I mean, that's a question I'm kind of trying to understand and navigate myself into. And I find myself answering those questions with some form of sympathy towards some kind of grounding and rootedness within the disciplinary framework. And I feel in a practical sense, it might be a little more easier perhaps to approach to having the disciplinary grounding at an introductory level and then moving on to interdisciplinarity, which also fosters or is derived out of genuine or organic or shared interests and approaches that also, and one, also when one is able to recognize that as well. Yeah, so of course, further discussions can of course continue. Thank you very much.
Yeah, right. So thanks, Ritam and Mansi. I think you all have brought in a whole other range of questions for us to address in this. Now, unfortunately, we are running behind time. So while I would have liked to have an open discussion here, but instead we can take the discussion. In a sense, actually, I have questions for all of you also. So we can have that over. We have, I think, some a tea coffee break, right? But before that, we'd like to felicitate our speakers, please. So, Dipanshu, would you like to come in, please? Okay, Krant, anyone.
That is interesting. They're ahead.
Let me do it for half of the time we are always
Okay, hello. Okay, now I can't actually see all the panelists, but I hope you can see. Firstly, good morning and thank you very much for being here. I know this is a Saturday and you're giving your time for us and we really appreciate it. And the room, although I'm mindful of the fact that the audience is lesser, but I think we really have audience who care. And everybody who's interested in understanding interdisciplinarity, as well as now particularly for this panel about the agrarian studies, and because I myself work around the areas of agrarian change, informality and rural development. That's my areas of interest. And since I am also the organizer of the event, I thought why not have a panel discussion around this topic, because this is as interdisciplinary as it could get. Like, I knew Raya from a workshop that we attended together. Both of us are econ students, and it's only after attending a conference or a workshop organized by the Journal of Peasant Studies, we really understood that agrarian issues are just not, I mean, economics issues. We do know it at some level, but after interacting with scholars coming from different disciplines, right, across social sciences and even some working in sciences, that's when we realized it's so much bigger and it's very interdisciplinary. And to even engage with each other, we don't have adequate knowledge about the terms that they use, the language, right? So to be patient and to understand and to engage is a big challenge, and we are all working towards it. And it is in that context, I thought having a panel on interdisciplinary approaches to agrarian studies could be a great addition to this Swaroop event. Now, with that, let me quickly introduce you to our panel members. We have Dr. Richa Kumar from IIT Delhi. She's an associate professor of sociology and science and technology studies. And her areas of specialization are sociology of agriculture, food and nutrition, and particularly science and technology studies. And I have read myself a lot that she has written on rural and agrarian policies. She is also a recipient of the inaugural Elizabeth Adiseshiya Memorial Award, New India Fellowship, and she's also core group member of the network of rural and agrarian studies. Right? And we have Vandana with us, who is also my senior at IIM Calcutta while doing PhD. And her teaching and research expertise also lies in political ecology, and she focuses on malnutrition, agriculture, nutritional linkages, sustainable development, and traditional ecological knowledge. And we keep on having discussions around degrowth and post-growth. So I think some of those things will come out today. And her PhD work also involves ethnographic work in Jharkhand and Odisha, and she continues to do field studies at different places now. And we have Dr. Raya Das, who is currently a fellow at Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations. We know it as ICRIAR. And she focuses on agricultural markets, public policy, credit, land relations, etc. And she has also spent her time doing fieldwork during her PhD in West Bengal, and later she has engaged in a lot of collaborative projects. And I think she worked in Bihar, Punjab, Madhya Pradesh, and did household studies there. Her PhD is from JNU. Then we have Ranjini Basu with us, and whose areas are political economy of agrarian studies, agricultural policy, rural and ecological transitions. And I think she's also focused a lot on agrarian mobilizations and food governance. She's even spent her time working with the United Nations Committee on World Food Security. She's taught as a visiting faculty at NLSU Bangalore. All of them have written extensively, are reading extensively about issues that really matter, and today I hope we get to hear at least some part of it and take these discussions forward. And now with us we have Shalini Singh, who is a journalist coming from a non-academia teaching research background, but she's also the co-founder of People's Archive of Rural India, which I'm sure all those concerned about agrarian issues keep following it. So that's a great thing that we have. And today I really requested her to be here because she's also working on issues that are concerned about climate change, and also really what is rural, what is urban, and the rural spaces within urban areas. So she covers a lot of that through her work, and it's actually available easily on the Pari website, so please go and check out. And she has won the first Khusro Irani Prize, the Prem Bhat Award, and the Ramnath Goenka Excellence in Journalism Award for her work on climate change. that she has been covering. She has been also working on issues related to gender, society and culture, covered them a lot. She's also been visiting, Nieman Fellow at the Harvard University for some time. So I'm really glad that we have such a stellar panel, and I can't wait to listen to your views. But so let me start with an opening question on what is agrarian crisis according to you. How does your discipline articulate agrarian studies? So it's your take as well as what your discipline does. Maybe if we can quickly have opening remarks for 2 minutes for each person, then we can continue the discussion. Yeah. So maybe, yeah, we can start anywhere.
Hello, thank you, Ideas and Kranti, for inviting me to such an, very core of my heart, the interdisciplinarity of agrarian studies. And this, I hope that, I can contribute some of my ideas into this platform. So the point of agrarian crisis, as you mentioned, I think that it is on page it makes kind of a sense of low farm income, but it is much deeper than that. It is much deep-seated. And if we see about the agrarian crisis in India, it is about the, rural wage precarity. It is not just agriculture as a sector, but how the rural economy is reproducing themselves. So if we see some, some basic statistics, we see that the share of agriculture employment in India, it is actually stagnant, and obviously the kind of increase it happened, like 42% to 46%, it happened before pandemic only. And the COVID-19 exacerbated that kind of issue and, that kind of stagnancy. So that is one of the major problem in Indian agriculture. And the structural transformation is also very much of, first of all, it is very challenging, and in case of India, it is one of the major issue of that labor absorption in Indian agriculture that is over the period is increasing. At the same time, we see that stagnancy or declining rural wage rate in last 5 years. So that means that agriculture households who have low farm income as well as in the non-farm opportunities, they have lack of income from that sector. So broadly, and this is multiplied with the the kind of rising input cost, market volatility, where I particularly work, I'm working now. So this we should see as an a very much of holistic manner, how agriculture households are actually reproducing themselves. And the challenge of reproduction itself is so huge that is reflected in many ways, like the indebtedness, and the extreme form can be farmer suicides. So in my mind, I think agrarian crisis in terms of problem and the the kind of a field practitioner, I can say the agrarian crisis itself is interdisciplinary, and now how you are looking into it, that depends on your own discipline. And as I was talking to Kranti in that way, one of the perspective of looking at it in critical agrarian studies, which is actually, interdisciplinary in nature, and also which focuses on many kind of pedagogy, including like heterodox economics, sociology, and the class and caste dynamics and all these kind of things. So this is kind of a platform of critical agrarian studies which can be further come into the pedagogy of these these kind of platforms to understand the agrarian crisis better. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Raya. And it's actually a great place for me to build on what she said. I am trained as a sociologist and a historian, but as Kranti mentioned, my training has been in an interdisciplinary space called Science and Technology Studies. And part of the critique of the discipline of STS towards more traditional disciplines like, say, sociology, for instance, has been that when we look at, one can take many spaces, but if we stick to the example of agriculture, then our perspective remains very much centered around the human being, around the so-called anthropos, where even when we are looking through multiple disciplinary lenses, which is economics or sociology or political science, or even history, the actors that are part of our story remain human beings. And so we certainly look at caste, class, and gender, or we look at economic questions, and they are very, very important to understand what's happening to agrarian societies today, not only in India, but globally. But we sort of are not able to, these disciplines do not have the tools to allow us to take nature very seriously, to understand that agriculture takes place in a physical geography, in an environment, in an ecology, and there are limits to what people can do in agriculture that are shaped and determined by the natural, I mean, they're called resources, but one can call them in many different ways through different kinds of framings and ontologies. Nature can be considered a completely different agent altogether. And so how does one analyze and understand the agrarian crisis, not just as a crisis of, let's say, social justice, if one can look at the caste, class, gender framings around it, which are really, really important, but also as one of ecological justice. How do we, I mean, a lot of the problems that farmers are facing today are precisely because nature is quote unquote hitting back. I mean, whether it's the pesticide treadmill, whether it's soil degradation, whether it's climate change and the impacts around that, we have this sense that through science and technology we can overcome many of these kinds of concerns, including climate change. There are all kinds of very interesting ideas that have been floating around, including blocking the sun's rays and throwing diamond dust in the air, and all kinds of ways to control and tame nature. And yet, farmers themselves who have been doing this for a very long time realize that agriculture ultimately is a performance of some kind. You can't really plan and control. You have to contend with what's happening on your fields every season, every day, in fact, in terms of agriculture being a true performance. So I think I'll stop here just in terms of my introductory remarks, but to make a case for finding methodologies and interdisciplinary lenses to understand how we can take on nature as a very important active agent in the process of producing this crisis, and how can we, in some ways, remove human beings from this pedestal we have put ourselves on, become more humble to understand how we can work with nature rather than tame or control it. Thank you.
Thank you, Richa and Raya, for articulating the agrarian crisis. Now, I'll just briefly give you an idea of what my situatedness is. So I come from a policy background, but my training and my work lies in what is broadly called as political ecology, and builds a lot on how we are framing the ecological degradation and what are the impacts on human society. So mostly I think in the agrarian crisis discussion, when we focus more on labor issues or on wage income centric, and that's something that I've found that we miss out on nature, as Richa was just mentioning, but political ecology analysis helps to bring out what are the impacts of climate change or agriculture on, what are the ecological impacts. And also, one of the key focus of the analysis is on power relations, right? And the whole framing of ecological degradation is that it is the change in power relation which causes this ecological, degradation. So, so that is the additional layer. And to give a context of this whole discipline, it emerged in the 1970s when there was this awareness, a rise of awareness about environmental issues, but they were not really happy about the way these environmental issues were framed from within either anthropology or economics, right? So, which is why political ecology emerged as a field which gives, or it uncovers the political aspects. So it's basically, it will say that it is the power relation change that is creating these ecological degradation. Why? Because the people who are at the receiving end, or who are supposed to adapt to these climate change impacts, have no space in the policy making process, for example, right? So in my own fieldwork, for example, I have seen how the local knowledge gets marginalized. So for example, when we see that the soil is changing, or when the forests are changing, for that matter, the traditional knowledge, or there is no space for that kind of knowledge system to actually participate in how do you actually respond to these issues, right? And then, of course, the farmers are supposed to cope and adapt. But then this whole analysis of power as causing ecological degradation is something that this particular discipline at least tries to bring out, right? And also, I mean, I will speak more in specific questions, but what my major work has been on bringing these, trying to bring the interconnections between what human health, what are the health experiences of people when ecological change happens around them in the spaces where they inhabit, right? So maybe for the second round, thank you so much.
Thanks, Vandana. Hi, everyone. I feel very privileged to be a part of this panel because everybody here is an expert who I have interviewed or interacted with for all the work that I've done. So thank you for having me here. My discipline is journalism, and I'll briefly tell you how I see the agrarian crisis. The heart of the matter, or the most severe symptom of the agrarian crisis is the farmer suicides. I mean, that's literally the most extreme, the way I see it. That we've seen over 3 lakh suicides in the last 3 decades. And I'm sure most of you would be familiar with P. Sainath's work, who's the founder editor of People's Archive Rural India, who's been covering this for the last 30 years. And most recently, we situated the agrarian crisis when the whole farmer protests were happening in 2018 and continued during COVID. In 2021, I covered it when there was, the farmers were planning and sort of an alternative Republic Day march in the heart of Delhi, and it was sort of sidelined or just got thrown off by a controversy and all of that. So, so directly we've looked at the agrarian crisis through our reporting, not just, Sainath, of course, all of us in different ways, all of my colleagues. We have 40 full-time people at PARI and 70 70 volunteers across India. And so directly we've looked at the agrarian crisis through several categories. You have farming and its crisis, looking at the troubled world of agriculture, you're looking at women farmers, you're looking at myriad sort of, categories within that. Now, indirectly, we've also looked at the agrarian crisis through livelihoods, the displacement issues, migration issues during COVID pandemic. We did almost over, I think, 200 stories during the pandemic. A lot of my colleagues walked with the migrants to their villages to cover these issues. Then we've done climate change. We've done almost like 50, I think, we did a collaboration with UNDP where we did about 40, 50 stories in about 3 years, where we looked at climate change across the nation, across geographies, across communities. And so we look at the agrarian crisis as not just a crisis in isolation, but it's sort of multifaceted in a sense, and it's interrelated with so many things. And largely that. And since I'm amongst the target audience for PARI, I'm going to do a quick plug, if you don't mind, just to tell you a little bit about the context of what PARI is and what PARI does. So we're a multimedia digital journalism space and an archive, and it's the only website that's dedicated to rural India, in which over 800 million people who, that they call home. We cover their everyday economic and social challenges, give voice to their politics and culture. We cover communal tensions, displacements, lack of access to basic needs. We call account to power for policies and laws that are not working and point out corruption. Our focus is exposing the inequalities and injustices in the system that impact India's poorest, who don't get a voice in the mainstream media, and other than the tired stereotypes or a one-odd story here and there. As an archive, we focus on, like I said, livelihoods, labor, arts, crafts, folk music, oral history that are fast disappearing in the face of increased, distress migration to cities for low-skilled jobs. And so we are trying to systematically cover these stories, to document this incredible diversity and sort of documentation, that gives agency to the people in it. And this is something that, I can of course talk more about it. Also, our content comes under Creative Commons and we are free to access. There are no government funds, no direct corporate grants or investments, no advertising revenue, and no subscription fee that would exclude anybody who wants to access the content that we put out. So our content is produced not just by experienced journalists, photographers, and filmmakers, but also people living on the margins as well as academics and students in the field. So we try to bring in anybody who's interested to tell a story about rural India, following a set of guidelines that we have on the site. And of course, we publish in about 14 Indian languages. That includes English, and we've been around for 10 years now.
Yeah, thanks, Kranti, for inviting, and thanks to Ideas as a platform. I think most of the panel has reflected on agrarian crisis. I think taking, and each of them adds on to what agrarian crisis is. Of course, the contemporary phase of agrarian crisis, as we understand, is kind of traced back to the 1990s economic liberalization policies coming into Indian agriculture. And for a long time, it was only seen as something manifesting in rural India. But we more and more, especially during COVID, for example, what Shalini was telling, the manifestations are now kind of seen across, the thousands of migrants walking back to the villages was also a manifestation. So agrarian crisis for me, I would say that it is not just now restricted to rural or agrarian economy, but has to be seen within the larger context of a jobless growth, Indian economy, status of Indian economy, and in all its kind of holistic economic situation within. And the repercussions of that are also not only restricted to the economic conditions of people, but also in the social relations, as was pointed out in relations of reproduction, how things are happening. But I would also say, I would try to, I'll want to bring back, a bit of the historical lens to this, that the agrarian crisis in India and overall in the global economy, when we study or try to understand the agrarian, I think it also has to be situated within the historical processes. Unless we take the processes of historical oppression, the lenses of caste, class, gender within of our understanding of the agrarian crisis, I think we're missing a point, a big point that and that is how I come into my disciplinary training into this, is unless we take a differentiated lens of looking at rural India, that it is not just one farmer or a populist take on the agrarian, rather that the agrarian or the rural is also differentiated. And my training in being, I've moved from disciplines across my academic training, but the framework that I work with is agrarian political economy. And in itself, like Raya was talking about, the critical agrarian studies, agrarian political economy is also by itself an interdisciplinary kind of approach, a framework. And it also looks at social relations of production and reproduction, and also equations of power relations in rural societies. And it has a longer background going back to not just theoretical debates, but also political debates. It is a very political kind of framing of the agrarian. So my point being, and I'll end with this, is that I think my add-on to this is that the agrarian or the agrarian society, the agrarian economy, as well as the agrarian crisis, has to be seen from a differentiated lens. And that is where the agrarian political economy framework comes very handy.
Thank you very much. I mean, so this is again very diverse way of looking at agrarian crisis, and everybody is going deeper and looking at it. And for instance, for journalism, if we do not have the news that is coming every time, we don't even know how to follow anything that is happening. Right? We can't keep sitting and waiting for the journal article which you submit today and comes out maybe 2 years, 3 years down the line. So, but our quick access of really understanding what is happening and anything is through some of this. So, thank you for that. For round 2 of questions, I was thinking that I'll pose specific questions to your area, and maybe I'll start with Dr. Richa. It is interesting when you mentioned that applications of science and technology. So if you could elaborate on how it could actually provide a solution to the larger agrarian crisis the way you defined. 3 to 4 minutes, yeah. No, please speak in the mic because it is recorded only if you speak in the mic. Yeah.
Maybe I'll possibly flip the question around a bit, or maybe convert it to ask whether there is actually anything that science and technology can do to help solve the crisis, not just what. There's a very nice book that came out a couple of years ago after COVID by Professor Glenn Davis Stone called The Agricultural Dilemma. And it's a fantastic take down in some ways of the dominant industrial model of agriculture. So it looks at the history of industrial agriculture in the United States, but also globally more generally, at the major inputs, including fertilizers, seeds, and pesticides that go into making mainstream industrial farming. And one of the most important points in the book is that this entire logic of industrial agriculture, I mean, basically when we say science and technology in agriculture, it broadly boils down to putting industrial inputs into the farm. And then taking output from the farm, processing it in some kind of industrial system and providing it to consumers. And his main point in the book is that none of this thing would have been possible without extensive amount of state subsidy and state support for all of the industries involved. And one of the primary reasons why this form of agriculture is continuing is because the people who are pushing for this, which is on the one hand industries, of course, because they benefit in the process directly through profits, but it's also the scientific community and the technologists, because there is a rationale for them to exist, for them to get funding, for them to do the work and research that they're trying to do. And unfortunately, there is no very clear advantage or benefit that one can make out for the farmer in the process. The farmer is not only going, as Dr. Raya and also Dr. Ranjani mentioned, this sort of indebtedness treadmill that farmers are on. And of course, you have in terms of the technology treadmill, the farmers who are more, resource endowed farmers, so typically farmers from privileged caste groups or privileged class groups, are able to possibly even profit to a certain degree when new technologies come in. They become the early adopters, but eventually farmers who are lower down the hierarchy from oppressed caste or class groups then end up on the indebtedness treadmill even faster. But as we have seen in the last 40 years in Punjab, Punjab farmers, they were of course criticized in these protests after COVID or around COVID as these tractor wala farmers, so these so-called very elite farmers, and what are they complaining about? But what one has seen is the unfolding of the process of industrial agriculture, in our case entirely supported by the state with huge amount of state subsidy for both input and output, has even brought these so-called tractor farmers on their knees. In terms of Punjab, in fact, is one of the states which has amongst the highest amount of indebtedness per farmer. And I'm sure, our fellow panelists can add more data on the kind of impact, economic impact, not to mention the health impacts of toxicity, the cancer trains, the air pollution impact of the stubble burning. I mean, we complain in Delhi, but actually the first impact is on farmers and farm families in Punjab. So many of those impacts have actually hurt some of the most elite farmers, so-called elite farmers, because of this particular treadmill. So coming back then to answer your question, Kranti, what can scientists and technologists do? In some ways, I think first recognize the huge amount of damage that we have already done. Without that kind of acknowledgement and recognition, I mean, I teach at IIT Delhi, and there was, few years before COVID, there was this push, again, ironically, towards interdisciplinarity. So we had a session with ICAR. So there were a few people who came down from ICAR, and there were a bunch of our engineers. And the most promising technologies in the room that were bandied about were more efficient ways to extract groundwater. We already know we are extracting so much of it, we want to put it back. And more sort of efficient ways to, improve rice yields and wheat yields in the country. I mean, we are overproducing rice and wheat up to here. We don't know what to do with it. So there is such a big disconnect in terms of the thinking both of ICR as well as our own institute. Hopefully this will not go up on the record. I still need my job. But that, the larger context of farming is really limited. And so the lens that scientists and technologists use is still a lens of productivity. And, coming back to Glenn Davis Stone's book, he really demolishes this idea so brilliantly, because he talks about how in the last 200 years, through the process of industrial agriculture, we have been overproducing food. And overproducing the wrong kind of food. So all of this Malthusian thing about, how will we feed so many billion people? I mean, that's utter rubbish. Sorry to use that word, but it really is. There is no data or evidence to say that we have a production problem anywhere. We certainly have now a huge disbalance. We're not producing enough dals, we're not producing enough oilseeds, we're importing all of that. We're, destroying our rainforests in Assam and the northeast to grow more palm oil, which none of us ever ate historically. So we're messed up in a variety of ways, but the problem is not lack of productivity. The problem is a whole host of other things. And so unfortunately, when scientists and technologists are only looking at agriculture from the lens of productivity, what are the solutions? It's drones, it's sensors, it's AI, it's apps, it's agri-stack. All of this is again meant to facilitate a monoculture form of industrialized agriculture. None of these technologies are suitable to alternative ways of looking at farming, which would require mixed cropping, polycropping, natural, organic, agroecology based. But those spaces are too complicated. And to use James Scott's term, illegible to the state. And so technology facilitates more legibility in very standardized ways. And we can also talk about this. I realize I'm sort of running over time, but I would like to also have a little bit of a discussion on urban and food spaces and how we look at standardization and technology as urban consumers when we think about food. But broadly speaking, for scientists and technologists to be meaningful at all in this debate, they need to think about how do we work with nature instead of trying to tame and control it. The entire approach of taming and control is a very, very problematic approach, but that is the fundamental approach justifying the very existence of science and technology in some ways across many of these disciplines. I'll stop here.
About but let me pass on the mic to Dr. Vandana. I'm connecting to this because she also works on food systems and public health. So, and what can you elaborate, Vandana, a little bit on the divide between production and consumption of food?
Right, so we have more time to discuss what Richa was just mentioning. And I would say, this whole idea is about the way we understand nature, and there has to be a difference. It's a very essentialized way in which we understand nature, and the way we understand communities as well. So whenever we have a problem with science, and this has been, and then we frame it as a difference between what is modern and what is traditional. Right, so when science has not given a solution, we run back to the indigenous communities to look for solutions, right? What is happening there as well is that we are also marginalizing the way they have understood these technological changes. And of course, in the broader policy discourse, we completely miss out on how agriculture can actually translate into health experiences. And there I would want to just point out a couple of things, because my whole journey started with looking at malnutrition as a problem, and then it became a political ecology issue and analysis, because what I found was there was a direct, from what I observed, there was a direct relationship between the way the nature of forest, the way the farms are changing. For example, most of our farmers, especially the indigenous farmers, are small farm holders, and they're all subsistence farmers. So what they grow is what they eat as well, right? So if we are killing production, diversity in production, so if we have monocultures in farm, the diversity from plates is also going away, right? So and of course there is this corporate control over the seed and the knowledge. So for example, all of the policy which is agriculture policy, of course, which focuses on income development or implementation of cash crop as a strategy. Now what do they understand as cash crops? Is cotton or paddy, which again is grown in monocultures. And of course there are a lot of stories from Pari which documents that wherever there is cotton, there is farmer suicide, right? And what is the nature of these seeds? And so it comes as a package, and that is something that that I've also seen in my fieldwork. States that it kind of marginalizes, it wipes out whatever they know about the farming systems, and therefore we don't really know who to go back to when we are, when we have hit the limits of science. And we now know that this is what science has given us. We are of course frustrated, and so we go back to traditional societies. But there also the kind of changes and the way policy itself has marginalized the space of knowledge is something which is an important thing to talk about. So my whole work was on highlighting the health experiences. So a lot of these policies, the agriculture policy, the forest policy, and in fact, even the education policy. So what are we feeding the kids? The way the food preferences are changing, the way their relationship with the forest itself is changing, right? So all of these things are very much intertwined. And these add to the ongoing, agrarian distress. So yeah, I mean, this whole, and yeah, I'm kind of missing out on, because of the time crunch. The other thing that I would want to highlight is the way our databases, the way we collect data about either agriculture or malnutrition in this country. So we don't have large databases where we can actually do an analysis of what happens when agriculture change to the malnutrition outcomes. So either it is, be it NFHs or it is NSSO, we don't really have all these indicators to do that large-scale empirical analysis because we don't look at agriculture. So agriculture will not look at, won't be bothered about malnutrition as an issue. And nutritionists or people who look at food or shape the nutrition policy will not look at what is going on in the farms or intervention, what is going on in the farms. So therefore, this disconnect is something that I feel is one of the major problems in the agrarian distress. And to sum it up, we have to start questioning how we understand economic progress or development and how we are creating certain either agriculture or health issues in this dominantly accepted pathway to progress, right? How do we envision development, and then what is going on that path to development is something that we need to start looking at, start questioning.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
So then, taking it from both of your points, maybe I'll ask Raya now to just talk about, see, we are talking again about the agribusinesses, agricultural markets, and how businesses and state together are probably dictating the dynamics of everything that is going on, production as well as consumption, right? So maybe Raya, if you can let us know about, are there any alternatives for effective production and consumption planning, or what do you see on?
Yeah, so like drawing from both the speakers, so we are basically, if we look at the agriculture market, so from the production side, if we talk about the major thing, that minimum support price, there are like many farmer protests surrounding that area. So it is itself the purpose was to give them a minimum floor price, and somewhere that has become maximum selling price, because only 10% of agriculture households are actually getting minimum support price in India. So, and also there is regional and crop bias. So if we talk about like paddy and wheat, that is only crops for where minimum support price is functioning, but there are 22 crops for which minimum support price is announced. So that includes what Richa was mentioning, that our kind of so-called Atmanirbharata regarding pulses and oilseeds. So there must be something like policy distortion, which has created a kind of like, to monocrop culture and also towards somehow cereal cropping pattern in India. But if we look at the, like, one is the procurement side, which is like MSP crops, which are not that perishable, but we are producing a lot of rice and wheat. We see that last year it was 3 times of our, like, the buffer stock limit, like, and also there was rice export boom from India, but at what cost? There is a huge water cost. We are not actually like exporting rice. It is kind of a, like, there can be a like in COVID time there was a kind of a thing that India is becoming a source of food security. They are sending rice to many African countries and also, but this export boom came at a price of the ecological crisis within the country. Coming to the non-procurement side, which is basically the fruits and vegetables and the crop diversification, like, for which again, like, there is a big disjoint between the policy and the, the kind of political economic variables we work with. Like, if we see that the agriculture market and agribusiness, there are different schools of thought, and also there are like different, I will say, targeted journals. Like, some are like, basically like the contract farming, some are like, there are many debates surrounding, and I'm not going in detail. But the point is, the basic thing is that how we improve farmers' share in consumer rupee. And that is also again very debatable. How do you look at the value chain efficiency that small farmers are getting their, as James Scott's term, the just price for their produce? So I think that it is important that we include the, like, whenever we are discussing about market access and the pros and cons of contract farming, it should be looked at from the class caste dynamics part of it, and we should include all those variables, not just for like research articles, but as also at policy level. Just give you an example, which Richa was also mentioning. We did a cluster analysis of the, like, the repayment capacity and the, like, the income of the households at NSS regional level. So Punjab came at low repayment capacity and high income zone. Whereas in West Bengal, it is low repayment and low income zone. But the output is same, it is indebtedness. Some form of it obviously depends on your consumption expenditure pattern and how do you, like, what is the distress situation and level. But we did a study with Punjab Farmer Commission on the farmer suicide households. So it was mixed method research design. It was 400 farmer and the farm labor household suicide. So seeing the pattern and their life story and what was the cause and factors behind it, the finding was something towards that it is related to the consumption expenditure, the health expenditure. Also, it is again interdisciplinary nature. It has the, like, the in Sangrur Bansa area, the, like, the water level going down. So again market is responsible. In that context, if you talk about anything related to minimum support price, that is the only resort for them to give them that kind of security that, they have a secured income sources from farming. But the other states of India, particularly eastern states where my PhD is from, I did the primary survey there, even it has a large farmer biasness for getting even the minimum support price. So I think the policy needs to be relooked from the perspective of class and caste dynamics. And like, regarding the value chain efficiency and all these things, it is a matter of question now that can the cooperative model work in India? Can small farmers, there are many examples from African countries, in Japan, in Indonesia we saw, but other than Amul cooperatives, the way the dairy sector was actually, like, the farmer share in consumer rupee for dairy, it is 75 to 80%. But for fruits and vegetables, just 30%. So can we do that? And can FPO model work? Those are the research questions I think needs to be, like, relooked to understand the agri-market crisis in India. Thank you.
Thank you. I think then I'll proceed to Dr. Ranjini. Sorry. No, this is so important when we are talking, and it leads to the models of food governance that we actually have, and how are we managing all this, right? So I would ask you maybe, and if you have time and if you would like to, maybe also talk a little bit about the land structure, the land relations, and how all these are interconnected.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for the responses because it gives the opportunity to build on them. So I think, yes, there's a lopsided nature to how agricultural policy has been framed and how, it gets adopted and how it gets adopted, and then the whole issue of the political economy of agriculture and rural households, right? Firstly, starting with the issue of land, let's say, so I also, the way I have come into agrarian political economy, agrarian studies, is through participation in village studies across India. I have been a long-time collaborator with the Foundation for Agrarian Studies, which is based in Bangalore, and that gave me an opportunity to visit villages across states. And something which is common across these villages and across regions is the vast diversity or the disparity and the inequality in the landholding structures, right? If you see the, the top 5% or 10% of households owning more than 50% or 60%, in some cases, in some villages, it is up to 90% of the land. Whereas the bottom 50, which is the manual worker households, if you see, they are mostly landless households. Related to this structure is then how the agrarian crisis is manifesting, right? Because land, we know, is the biggest asset and controls a lot of power, and as a asset which controls power and social and reproductive capacities. So in this scenario, in a situation where profitability from agriculture has been declining, those who have land at least are using this to give out as tenancy. So if you see the levels of tenancy, they have constantly risen since the 1990s. And this is a trend that we are seeing. So taking a very concrete example of Punjab, because Punjab came up quite many times in the discussion, and something that my present project is also on Punjab. The recent news that you have seen about the immigrants coming back, right, from the US. If you go to, of course, Punjab is also very diverse, regionally diverse, and there are different regions, and they differ from each other. But general trend is that those who have land are now giving up on that land. Either they are selling it off, or they're putting in tenancy and then leaving, because agriculture is not giving as much as profit as a land contract. Yearly, annual contract would give, right? But then what happens to those people who don't have land, right? This is a question to be asked. And also this tenancy market, again, is also perpetuating inequalities. There are big tenants coming up, right? There are, in some regions, Dalits households are getting access to land, but they do not have the means to do the cultivation, right? So different patterns are coming up. So I think unless we take these fundamental issues of land distribution, of land inequality, and inequalities based on caste, class, gender, as we were talking, from the historical lens, and there is no there's no solution to these fundamental issues, then whatever agriculture policy is kind of brought in, they will manifest and they will keep on reproducing these issues at the core. Just to say that, something that was kind of talked a lot about, cropping diversification, issues of why people are taking up monoculture and things like that. One thing, and also we were talking about a lot of groundwater extraction, something which is related again to my project. So the
present postdoctoral project, so that's why I wanted to intervene a little on that, is that we have to see how agriculture policy regimes have also shifted. You know, if you see since 1991, public spending on agriculture, and something Raya can also say because she's worked on something on a similar project, that agriculture spending has gone down. And this has a direct, equation with expansion of groundwater extraction, because your investments into canal irrigation, on surface level irrigation, which by their nature are communal, right? There's a canal passing, so everyone has access. If you have a groundwater tube well, that's only accessible to the person whose tube well it is, on whichever plot it is, right? So as a result, the investment decreased in surface irrigation, which moved towards groundwater, more groundwater extraction, and that is a consequence of something that we are kind of seeing. Punjab is facing, most of its blocks are under, highly extractive kind of state. So I think that, so on these two grounds, is that these fundamental, issues of historical inequalities that have not been taken care of through agrarian reforms, through land distribution, those have never been taken seriously by, the political discourse. And secondly, how agriculture policies have to be related to the economic regimes they have acted on, and how they have been perpetuating this kind of resource extractive kind of agriculture that we are witnessing now.
Thank you for that. Actually, so just mentioned maybe we don't have a solution. I was just thinking maybe the solution is not just at the policy level. Maybe solutions are also very much political. I don't know. And going forward with Shalini, now I will ask you, who are the vulnerable communities in all this process? And especially since you have been working on climate change, and how does all this tie up? And what are we academicians missing to see? I mean, what should we probably look at, right? So you want to play the screen?
I'll just speak a little and then.
Yes, yeah.
So my work on climate change in Delhi has a bit of a personal stake, because I'm 44 years old, and till a decade ago I didn't know that we have a river in Delhi, and going by the way the Yamuna has been treated in this city for the last 40 years, it's really not a river. And I had to refer to history books to find out that 40 years ago, in the Okhla Barrage, which is 3 kilometers from my house, you had dolphins and tortoise, and there was boating, and there was fishing, and there was swimming in the 1970s. And I said, this is like straight out of like a science fiction story. Like, I feel cheated as, now a middle-aged person, citizen of this city. I feel cheated of something that was, very much a part of, the city. So that's how I was personally invested in doing the stories that I did in 2019. In fact, the river was considered the lifeline of Delhi. I'm sure all of you would know, during the Mughal times, it was considered an art form, the way the water system was designed. And so basically in 2019 at People's Archive of Rural India, we embarked on a nationwide coverage of climate change, where we collaborated with UNDP. And I spent a better part of the year researching and reporting on the lives and the experiences of the remaining farmers and fishermen of Delhi. And the first question I get asked is, there are farmers and fishermen in Delhi? Like, really? And I said, yes. I mean, I think about 5,000 to 7,000 farmers now, going historically from the time of independence to now. These are the remaining numbers. And fishermen would be around less than 100 today, compared to like over 1,000 during independence. So you're looking at decimating communities over the last 4 decades. And the very fact that fisher folk are disappearing from a river means that the river is dying. And hence, just these symptoms tell you what really, the problem is. So basically the idea was, to do the stories through the lives and the livelihoods of the most vulnerable communities was the fact that the communities most impacted by climate change are also the most aware of the realities of what these impacts are. And we were trying to, and it was a very complex process which we were trying to sort of break down for anybody who's reading these stories. And this is something that we felt that even people like us who did not know much about climate change till we started working on them, is that a lot of the discourse around climate change, issues like climate change, are in these silos of jargon and technical language, which I know are important to the disciplines, but they also keep out people who might want to understand these issues. And so I feel that as journalists, as reporters, we try to be a bridge between what the technical knowledge is, what's happening on the ground, what the policies are. So sort of trying to decode, let the technical folks know this is what's happening on the ground, and then for the people in policy to tell them that this is how, this is what's happening, these are the issues, and sort of, so that's broadly the kind of work that we try to do when it comes to climate change. I'll just quickly give you a statistic and then we can go into the video. The length of the Yamuna River, which is also the longest tributary of the Ganga, is 1,376 kilometers. Of this, just 22 kilometers or 1.6% flows through the National Capital Territory, and nearly 80% of all the pollution in the Yamuna today is caused by Delhi alone. So 1.6% of the Yamuna causes 80% of the pollution in the river, and this is, the NGT, the National Green Tribunal this is what they say. 40% of Delhi has no sewer connection, which means that waste and excrement is simply dumped into the river. There are over 50,000 industries operating illegally in residential areas whose effluents also go directly into the river. So these are all figures from the National Green Tribunal. So yeah, there's a lot more, but I'll quickly sum it up for you in a 1-minute video, which I shot of a farmer on the Yamuna, in the Yamuna floodplains in 2019.
इंडिया के अंदर पहले कच्चे रोड थे, कच्चे घर थे और बाग बगीचे ज़्यादा थे, जिससे कि गर्मी और सर्दी महसूस नहीं होती थी। अब ठीक है, कंक्रीट तो बना दिया, लेकिन पेड़ पौधे कितने कम कर दिए। पहले बर्फ यहाँ थी, आज वहाँ कैसे पहुँच गई, उस पर्वत पे कैसे पहुँच गई जो हम उठा करके देखते थे, आज वो हमारे को दर्शनों के लिए दूर से नजर आती। तो इससे फर्क पड़ता है। हिमाचल में जो चीड़ की लकड़ी पैदा होती थी, सुगंध उठती थी वहां से, आज वो पर्वत जो है सूने खड़े हुए, बिल्कुल सूने हैं। हमारी ससुराल मथुरा के अंदर है, उसमें कम से कम 50 पेड़ थे नीम के या जामुन के या आम के। आज उस गांव के अंदर एक पौधा नहीं मिलेगा। मैं खुद देख कर हैरान रह गया। गया था मैं भी साल भर पहले, जब देख कर हैरान रह गया। क्यों इतने बड़े काट दिए, किसके लोभ से? एक जगह के लोभ से और पैसे के लोभ से। तो हिंदुस्तान ये अपने आप बर्बाद हो रहा है, क्योंकि अपनी सोच से यदि पेड़ पौधे लगाएंगे तो इनको पानी भी मिलेगा और अन्न भी मिलेगा। अगर ये चीज इन्होंने छोड़ दी तो कलयुग का वर्णन पढ़ना रामचरितमानस के अंदर, उसमें लिखा हुआ है कि आदमी 2 ही प्रकार से मरेगा, ना झगड़े से मरेगा ना रगड़े से मरेगा। एक भूख से और प्यास से मरेगा, दूसरी तीसरी चीज कोई बीमारी भी नहीं होगी, लेकिन 2 ही चीजों से मर जाएगा।
Sorry, that's a bit grim, but that's the reality. Yeah, I don't know if you guys want to hear some more grim statistics. So the landmark signature bridge, which on the Yamuna, I guess many of us would have seen it, which is twice the height of Qutub Minar, was built in less than a decade at the cost of around 1,518 crores. And the amount spent in cleaning the Yamuna since 1993, almost over 3 decades, with no success so far, has been over 1,500 crores. I think that's half of the figure that I've gotten. So,
That is grim. I don't know what to do. I know that we're running short of time and the next panel we should begin. Just if I can ask you all to, in 1 or 2 lines, if you give some quick policy recommendations from what you're saying, if it's possible. So, and that would be the end of the session and we can move to, and I hope we can carry forward all our discussions over lunch. Yeah, so please, yeah. Maybe we'll start with Vandana. Yeah.
2 lines.
Or maybe keywords. Yeah.
2 keywords. It's maybe interconnected policy making. Like we're talking about discipline, interdisciplinarity. Maybe we should have more collaborative policy making. I mean, I see Forest working on some agenda of conservation, throwing people away from their habitats. Agriculture focusing on income and not looking at nutrition. Nutrition giving them I don't know, supplements which are procured in faraway markets, and then their old farms are changing. So this whole income route of arriving at well-being is something that I don't think we have been able to achieve. So yes, for policy making, I would rather say that a more interconnected way, in the spirit of interdisciplinarity, a more interconnected way of policy making itself, so that you look at the bigger picture and then collaborate and you know, address issues.
I'm sorry, I'll be doing head nodding, wrapping it up, but Dr. Richa, yeah.
So 3 things I'll say, but before that I wanted to thank Kranti for putting together such a fascinating panel, and I've learned a lot here today, and I want to pick up from what the farmer said. I think the first point I want to talk about is what you mentioned earlier, degrowth. We are all caught up in this larger economic logic of growth, which is absolutely, I mean, we just in the same breath, you know, we passed 1.5 degrees centigrade from pre-industrial levels in terms of actual global average temperature change just in the last few months. And this number was supposed to happen first in 2070, then in 2050, then we were told 2030. I taught this last semester in November, and the data was saying 2027, 2028. So I have no idea what's happened in 4 months, but we've already hit 1.5 degrees. So there is serious, I mean, we can talk at our level, but you know, 10 years down the line, God knows what's going to happen to the Himalayas. Scientists are already worrying at what's happening on the, you know, on the North Pole, because they suspect that methane, underground methane is probably going to begin leaking possibly, because the North Pole is all now melted. And that can cause serious tipping points. And so the story over the next 10 years, we'll see it unfold before our eyes. So what kind of world we will have or we will live in, we are not sure. And still we are like, as you know, the farmer is telling us, so, I mean, it was such a beautiful way of capturing it so simply, right? Ki kis cheez ka lobh hai hamare andar? And you know, what really is the kind of world we want to live in? So that was just actually the first point. I'll take 1 more minute. The second was just, I want to add to what Vandana said, you know, this whole point about food. As urban consumers, we sort of feel that, you know, we are so disconnected with this whole thing. But the only way the industrial agriculture treadmill actually functions is because urban consumers are demanding or made to demand certain kinds of foods, which all look exactly alike, which are standardized in a particular way. And that is how, you know, going back to Raya's point about these supply chains, I mean, contract farming works, for example, you know, you have that Lay's chips, and so that FL2027 potato that PepsiCo has patented, that's the one it wants farmers to grow. That's the one that will get your absolutely round size of the chips with the perfect texture and flavoring. So as consumers, we need to become more aware of what is it that we are demanding for, what is it that we are eating, what is it that we are feeding our children, and what this industrialized packaged food, but also industrialized food in terms of, you know, the atta that we are having coming from processing plants is devoid of most of the nutrition. All of the packaged data that we're eating, the refined vegetable oil that we're having, the refined white sugar. So there are so many industrial food products today that we use as raw materials in our cooking. So even if you're cooking at home, freshly cooked stuff, that itself is very compromised. So there is a real need for consumers to understand what it is that they're eating and get sort of on the bandwagon in terms of working with farming communities to bring about some kind of change. And the last point I want to make is also a point that's been mentioned, especially from Ranjani's point, you know, coming back to questions of tenancy and inequality. There is now a shift, growing shift, both at the highest levels of policy, although maybe perhaps much of that is really rhetoric, but also on the ground of farming communities trying to move towards agroecology. The issue, however, there is that we can have agroecology, but if you don't do anything about in unequal social structures, then you will have big farmers, quote unquote, these big men farmers, upper caste farmers change, but you will still have Adivasi farmers, tenant farmers, everybody else still toiling in various ways, especially as labor on agroecological farms. And so social justice and ecological justice in some ways have to go hand in hand. We can't divorce the two. Thank you.
Raya.
Yeah, to just keep it quick, like I think that I'll give 3 points, direct policy recommendations. That one is that we should think about the farmers' economic situation. Just give one line of statistics on that. If we see the farmer income from 2018-19 data at the current level, it is about 12,000 to 13,000 per household, and the household consumption expenditure data gives us that agriculture household spends about 3,000 rupees per capita, which comes down to 12,000 per household. So that is the lack of repayment capacity and the economic distress situation they do have. So one quick, which policy, like the recent budget also announced, the PM Kisan, which is 6,000 rupees per household for the last 7 years, that should be increased, like at least at the real price level, adjusting to somewhere like comes to 8,000, 10,000 rupees. And second is that only Punjab, I think, if I am not mistaken, they include farmers and farm laborers. So many state budget also, they don't consider agricultural laborer as a policy target within the agricultural framework. But the percentage of agricultural labor increased from 28% to 54% now. So that is important to give them income support as well. And third would be we are talking about the market platforms, but we really don't know that, maybe at some state level there are framework for contract farming, but in reality it is expanding. So it is important to understand the repercussion of it, as Richa was also mentioning. In my field also, I have seen that farmers have to cultivate Atlanta variety for McCain. So, but they don't have any open market for that kind of commodities. 40% is discarded produce. So we need more legalization and framework to understand is the cooperative structure is the solution, and how small farm, what is the future pathway for small farmers in India in terms of marketizing their output. And last will be the recent we worked one thing with University of Illinois on post-harvest loss. As we are discussing about the production and consumption gap, 30% of our production doesn't reach to consumers. So we need real infrastructural development, and there the region is also very important. Even if the contract farming is happening, it is going to the agriculturally developed village. It's not going to the arid village. So the government's part, they should expand the infrastructural development, road density, and also the post-harvest value chain, more cold storage and all these things to reduce these post-harvest losses and increase farmer share in consumer rupee. Thanks.
Thank you. Shalini, 2 lines, please. Yeah.
Firstly, I want to congratulate you and appreciate this, the idea of the panel of bringing together, people from different disciplines. I think it's such a great idea because as a lot of us working, on the field, we are able to share and, exchange the information, that we find with, folks who are in policy or, in research and analysis, and the questions that may come up, from you guys, we can take to the, sort of inform our reporting. So I think it's a great idea. And since I gave you a lot of grim statistics earlier, I'll just put a line of hope. I think the way I would see it from sort of a broad canvas is to imagine the kind of future we want in the next 20, 30, 40 years from now. And not just for ourselves, but for our future generations. So, and work backwards from that vision. And so if we say that in a globalized world today, if home is everywhere on the planet, then to reimagine its future, we have to start at home.
Ranjani.
Thanks for organizing this panel, of course. I'll just make 2 points quickly, and first is an example. Again, going back to Punjab, because that's the most recent field work and that sticks to you, right? So the government has introduced a DBT, right? A direct beneficiary transfer of MSPs. Saying that we will directly transfer the money to the bank accounts of the farmers, whoever comes to sell their produce at the food grain mandis, right? And this they are doing because they want to weed out the commission agents, the artiyas, right? People who have been following the farm protest, artiyas are spoken about, and they are seen as, these profit-making intermediaries, right? But on the ground, if you go and if you see what the DBT is doing, you would, government would be projecting, okay, we've introduced DBT, solutions have been provided, now farmers are getting their incomes into their hands, right? But if you see, especially the smaller farmers, the resource care farmers who has to, loan in money to even go with the production cycle for that particular season, still has to go to the artiya or the money lender or the commission agent, right? So now the artiyas have started giving out their loans depending on the amount of land they have, okay? Or they're keeping their passbooks, bank passbooks with themselves. So whenever the DBT happens, they have to actually come and, it's almost like bonded, kind of, yeah? So I'm saying that these technocratic solutions that are being put out, especially now with DBTs and a lot of Aadhaar-linked solutions, on ground, because of the core inequalities that we were talking about of land holdings, of asset holdings, on caste lines, class lines, and things like that, till they perpetuate, no solutions are going to work, okay? And secondly, the second point that has not come into this discussion, something that I just wanted to bring up because something that I have kind of also looked at is on international trade. So we were talking a lot on food security, on procurement, on PDS and things like that. Given the global structure of an export-oriented agriculture, the World Bank and the WTO and things like that, there's still a big gap between the global north and the south. So we cannot leave behind the question of food security, of food access, as we saw during these crises that emerged, the COVID crisis or the Russia-Ukraine war, for example, the food crisis that emerged. Countries who are dependent on imports, the net food importing countries, especially from the developing, world, really, there was a crisis of food, right? So we cannot leave behind these larger global equations out of the picture when we are also discussing national policies and domestic policies.
Yeah, maybe even think of food sovereignty as a concept itself. Okay, so I think we are done and we don't have time for Q&A, but taking it over. One line, so I think just paraphrasing all this that have come together, I think we should think about how the rural economy reproduces itself and be mindful of the blurring of rural-urban spaces and keep an eye for the vulnerable communities that are there. Bring the agency of people, bring the power analysis and a differentiated lens together, and to sum up with Dr. Richa's line, that recognize the damage that has already been done and maybe begin there. So thank you very much for being patient with us.
We have a screening here for which we are a bit late, so thank you so much for coming in. Thank you. Please, we'll just take a group photo together. Let's do that. Thank you so much, Alan. Thank you. We need to connect this study, so I'll have a chance to separately. Thank you so much. So each of these colors
There will be a screening of Alma, directed by Chandan Gomes, who is here, and also there will be discussion with Deepak Pandyaraj from the psychology field from the different department at Jindal. So Chandan Gomes is a photographer, filmmaker, educator whose work examines themes of identity, human rights, and social change. A graduate of St. Stephen's College, Delhi University, he was the artist in residence at the Center for Documentary Studies, Duke University, where he deepened his exploration of visual storytelling. His work has been showcased at various places in Houston and India as well, at like, for example, Photo Fest Binale, Recons Dulles, and Lance Corona Museum, and Kochi Muzris Binale. Chandan has received numerous fellowship awards, including the INK Fellowship for Bookmarking, a grant from Frederick Norman Foundation to document Indian borders, and multiple awards for his acclaimed short film Alma, which we will be seeing soon. Widely published in outlets like the New York Times, his project amplify critical issues such as mental health, disability rights, and migration, offering powerful and enduring narratives. So now we will see his film, Alma, which is a 12-minute short movie which was released in 2024 March.
She's standing there. She shouldn't. Everyone can see her. She must stop. She needs to stop. You need to stop. Stop. Look at us. Look at us. Drop it. Let it breathe. I love you. I love you. I love you. Will walk up to you in a white dress. Us, the child in me, becomes a woman. Will walk up to you in a white dress.
Look, it bleeds. Please make it stop.
Breathe.
Let it breathe.
She needs to breathe. She needs to breathe. Is
Nothing
she
can
breathing?
be done now.
You need to breathe.
Breathe.
What you about to
Let's
play?
play hide and seek.
Let me see you. Let me see you.
Creases in the sheets.
Let me see you. There you are.
Dilly dilly lavender screen. Will you love me, dilly dilly, 'cause I love you? Who told you so, dilly dilly? Who told you so? 'Twas my own heart, dilly dilly, that told me so.
Bittersweet.
Bittersweet. Bitter, sweet, 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 bitter,
I love to dance in the rain with a purple flower in my hair. She sees him again.
Where were you all this while?
I was here.
I couldn't see you.
You weren't looking.
You saw me.
Yes. I love it when you dance.
Really? Why?
Should there be a reason?
No. You're just trying to be nice.
Do I look like a nice person?
So you will break my heart.
I will. Leave now if you wish.
But I want to stay. Stay and sing a song.
I cannot hear anything.
An unspoken song.
I have to leave.
You left me that day.
I loved you that day.
You hurt me.
I made you stronger.
I'm alone here.
Ghosts are.
Am I dead?
Your memories are. I have to leave.
Leave. Look, it stopped hurting. You kissed it away. Look, it glows. Oh, how it glows. It glows and glows and glows.
She was a fabulous dancer. She is a fabulous dancer. She performs every evening as though her being depends on it. She moves with rhythm to music that only she can hear. But I can tell there isn't a single misstep from the fluidity of the movements that I observe. She's a study in concentration, the way she seems to be caught in this meditative, almost trance-like state, oblivious to the world around her. This world, the world of us, the world that she's separated and protected from by this window made of thin glass. the window that sets the demarcation between the parallel realities that she resides in. To the world that exists on this side of the window, she is one of the patients admitted at a psychiatric hospital. She has been diagnosed with schizophrenia, with her disorder meeting the well-understood behavioral criteria for it. As a dancer, over the years, she has traveled far across the world, delivering riveting performances, till her trajectory was broken by the fracture of a relationship. She has been here for the last few weeks, with her treatment underway and recovery impending. Schizophrenia is a serious disorder that plays with one's perception, making one hear and feel things that aren't there. Approximately a year ago, she began to hear voices of people talking to her and about her. They'd tell her to do certain tasks, but they'd then punish her by becoming louder and louder, making her lose focus on anything at hand. And sometimes, there would be the voices of 2 or 3 people talking amongst themselves, with her being the subject of the conversation. Over the past 6 or 7 months, the illness made her cut off from her friends and family, often making her misconstrue the things they'd say and do, eventually making her feel afraid of them, something commonly referred to as paranoia. Our textbooks say that people with schizophrenia tend to withdraw and involute, as though they've sentenced themselves to exile. But when I see her across the glass, it's clear that she has not read our textbooks. Far from involuting, she's taken her dance up a notch. And with the effects of the treatment gradually setting in, her voices may completely fade away, and she'll begin to connect with the world once more. The glass window turns into a mirror at night. When she had just arrived, I'd see her shy away from it, from looking at herself. But with time, I see her gaze into it. I don't know what she sees. Perhaps she sees herself, perhaps she sees her lover, or maybe she sees infinite possibilities. She knows that now she can embrace what's on the other side. She's not afraid anymore. The window is a fine line between normal and abnormal, and the sides can be flipped anytime for anyone. But for now, we wait.
What is your name?
So we welcome Chandan Gomes, Deepak Pandyaraj, whose introduction I will be giving later on, and Nitya. Yeah. So about this film, we will open the session for the questions. Whatever you need to ask, you can ask these people as well as other people who have so much expertise in analyzing movies, etc. So the first question I would like to ask Chandan is about that: how did you come down to make something like mental health as a theme for this film?
Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm by practice a documentary photographer who decided to make a film during COVID because my logic was that, how worse can things get? So it's a good time to try something new, even if it kind of tanks or bombs. So as a photographer, I've been preoccupied in my practice with a couple of things. One of them was I was photographing a hospital over a decade ago in Jaipur, and I had to extensively cover all the departments. And the neurology department was something that always got my attention. And that was because I used to wonder that something that is, I mean, I used to see these patients of cerebral edema, which is basically swelling of the brain. And I used to wonder that, something that is happening inside the body, how far can a visual medium like photography show that? And that became a preoccupation. That is it even possible for photography to show something that is not visible? The other incident, which kind of again made me think deeply about it, was I decided to photograph a landfill in Delhi, the Ghazipur landfill. And the reason I decided to do was that whenever I was on the highway, specifically near the monsoons or during the monsoons, the landfill looked gorgeous to me, because you had the clouds, you had the birds circling it, and it was like this one mountain, even of garbage in the middle of the city. So I decided to go to the landfill, and I was doing the usual pictures, which everyone does. Like my background, I started out as a photojournalist, so I met a rag picker there, and he said something very interesting to me, which was, something I've never forgotten. He said that, see, I don't know why are you photographing this landfill. Khatta is what it's called, because the purpose of a landfill is to hide garbage, right? Like you're hiding a city's garbage in this. So if the purpose of an object is to hide things, can photographs really show it? And these two instances for me became like a lifelong preoccupation. So then I've been negotiating with those ideas in my photography, and they sort of spill into this film as well.
Yeah, about the photograph, like you capture something, but then there are different kind of interpretation of the image. But in the movie itself, you can contextualize characters, their background. So how do you see these films playing that role in terms of like bringing the a different kind of like social background to the characters? So for example, taking from sociology, anthropology, like if we talk about different kind of a field, like for example, if we think about mental health. So as I was talking to you before the session about like there are different kind of a film which has emerged over the period of a time. If you think about on mental health, so your this movie reminds me of Dear Zindagi, in which Alia Bhatt dream of falling off the building, and this is her dream, which is like she is seeing these women who are commenting on her. So that how you again and again replay in a certain way the interaction with the people who have certain kinds of a judgment on you. So, similarly talking about House of Secrets, Burari death, Leena Yadav had made a documentary on that. So that, for example, in that documentary, so when I saw that, I was wondering about that, why there are no sociologists, for example, brought to the documentary to talk about or to make certain kind of a, like giving a certain kind of a context, because there were journalists, Barkadat, and there were psychologists, but no sociologists. So, but in sociology, like there are Emile Durkheim, which has worked on suicide and that how we can understand suicide from a sociological point of view. So how do you see like using different fields of sociology, anthropology, in terms of making these film or bringing those kind of a perspective?
Yeah, I'll try my best to answer. It's a really long question, but I'm just running it in my mind. Yeah, see, I think filmmaking, like any other art form, thrives in a context. specifically when you look at fiction. In fiction, at the end of the day, it becomes important. It is about what you want to say and the story you want to tell, rather than, say, an objective view of something. So when you see films on the Second World War, versus actual footage from the war, the interpretation of the same battle could be very, very different. So it depends on what aspect of filmmaking one is looking at. See, the Burari case film on Netflix. It is more like a docudrama. It is based on a real incident and it is investigating that, but it also has elements of fiction in a very latent way, where they're also trying to create a narrative that there's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end, and it almost has the vibe of a psychological thriller. Because when you read the case in newspapers or in magazines, it was clearly reported. So maybe for the filmmaker at that point, and also it also depends on how many people, what kind of an audience you wanted to reach. So maybe when the film was shot, because what we are looking at is the final product, right? Like an edit. Who knows, there were sociologists who were interviewed or other stakeholders as well. But maybe in the final edit, they decided to not include them. But definitely when, like say for my film, the entire voiceover is done by a psychiatrist and a psychologist, because the biggest question what the dilemma I was facing was that, as a filmmaker, as an artist, what I was writing might have been moving and beautiful, but maybe it was a little away from the reality I wanted to speak of. And I thought that issues of the mind or mental illness is sometimes at least misrepresented a lot. So I got a psychologist and a psychiatrist on board after research. I was working with different people, it was not working out. So the gentleman who basically delivers the monologue at the end, his name is Dr. Shwetang Bansal. He's a Delhi-based psychiatrist, and he runs an organization which looks at mental health in a very sort of in a very lived way, in a lived experience, and does a lot of programming around it. So we used to have these constant conversations, and earlier the ending of the film was very different. The ending was that the film ends with the first conversation between the psychiatrist, who you see at the end, and the patient. But it was abstract and it was poetic, but it was abstract, so I had to make a choice. So I went with this. So again, it depends on what you really want. For me, I think my practice as a documentary photographer and working in all those spaces informed this choice. But maybe if I was to remake this film, maybe I would go back to including the first dialogue between them, which I thought was abstract and poetic, and didn't offer any conclusion, but let it be there. So it again largely depends on what is it that you're trying to say through your film or through any work of art, literature, photography, anything.
Just a very quick question, it's a tech. I was very amazed the camera work and throughout the interactions. Could you just talk a little bit about colors and camera, just the way you used this in?
Yeah. No, so I think that is where my training or my experience, I'm not trained as a photographer, but I've been in the field for over a decade now. Really helped. I wanted, because my film had no dialogues, it had to be very, very visual. And I always feel that, be it photography or filmmaking, it is more about telling than more about showing than telling. So that became a primary focus for me, that like it begins with this dance piece. So we are assuming that at least I assume that the character had a history in dance. Perhaps she was a dancer who's here, which the psychiatrist at the end also sort of speaks of. So even when I was working on that piece, I was working with this choreographer who works on contemporary dance, Mandeep Rekhi. So the entire sort of context I gave him was that it has to be very physical and expressive, and It has to bring in her turmoil, it has to bring in her dilemmas, it has to bring in the fractured sense of the self. And with the DOP, the entire thing was that make it as, as moving as possible. Let us just divide every scene and see how her hands are or what is the gesture on her face, and also work with a lot of light, like, divide the space into two parts. So let's put her in the blues and give the warmer tones to the room inside, which is basically a room of discarded objects in that hospital or that hospice or whatever that space is, to also kind of turn around the idea that how colors work. Like at the end of the film, when I was thinking of this film, writing it or making it, I felt that room inside was where everything is restricted and constricted, though it has all the warm tones and the warmth of light and everything, whereas on the outside where she's struggling and is alone by herself in that amphitheater, that is where there's some kind of real freedom. So turn around the idea of light to say that blues can represent, instead of say showing something that is closer to, blue is generally, we use the expression, right, you're feeling the blues today, so when you're low or you're depressed, like, that's, but I wanted to flip that idea with the color and leave it at the psychiatrist's sort of dilemma, that he starts questioning his own practice, which is something that often I realized in field, that idea of black and white is not really black and white. How do you decide a diagnosis is a question I used to always ask myself, over the years, because not just photographing such spaces, but also seeing people dear to me, getting into therapy to getting into medication. Those were questions that constantly I kept thinking, that how does psychiatry decide? How does that exactitude work within it? I mean, I don't have answers, but that was a question I kept sort of living with, and I still think about it.
Thank you, Chandan. So now I will introduce Dr. Deepak Pandyaraj, who is currently Assistant Professor at Jindal School of Psychology and Counseling, and also Assistant Director of ECOG Research Center, OP Jindal Global University. Earlier, he was Research Fellow at Humanities and Social Sciences Department, IIT Bombay, and Assistant Professor at SRM Institute of Technology, Chennai. He was CSIR Diamond Jubilee Research Awardee at National Meteorological Laboratory, Chennai. He was a UGC Research Fellow at Humanities and Social Science Department, IIT Bombay. His MPhil research was focused on psychology of self-conscious emotions, which I saw and I was like, this is a very interesting topic. And doctoral research on philosophical psychology approaches to communication for social and social transformation. In his dissertation, the self-decentering model of communication, which you would like to use to analyze this movie, was developed and applied to analyze film, fiction, and modern science. So, would you like to say something?
When I just managed to watch the film and listen to my own voice, this is what was happening to me. Can you move to the next picture? Then I managed to bring it down to a level where I can work. So you can see, even this is too much for 10 minutes. So I decided to just use 3 repetitive thematics, which are interdisciplinary. You can switch it off. I am just talking at the level of philosophical reflection of the text, the movie. It raises few questions. Philosophers are good in asking questions. So the one that really struck me is, what is a subject? What's a human being? Is it something that we can reduce it to, let's say, reason, or something that is fully determined based on one? Or we are probably a flux, and there's a consistency which produces this one, but underlying that one, there's upground. So if you see what kind of subject this movie is producing is an important question. It opens up a possibility of understanding humans with their fragments and split in the subjectivities. So the three themes that I identified, the first one is transversality and then interdisciplinary thought, is something that I really see this movie as a space which allows for transversality to think at various levels simultaneously. This opens up that possibility. And the second one is we have this understanding of film which has to say a narration, a story, which begins with a problem, and then it resolves, and then there's a structure, there's an ideological element, which film studies do a lot of work on it, the language of film itself. But a movie like this, a short film like this, it brings notions of memory, time, and it disrupts it through affect. So it speaks at the realm of pre-linguistic experiences that are there in us in an effective way. If you see the first half of the movie, I see the first half is an opening, a window to a world. I would say worlds, or voices, plurality, the symphony of multiple voices coming together, or multiple memories coming together. I would see the first half of the movie has three disruptive moments. There's a way the subject is relating to the other subjects, and then you see the transition, the way subject is relating to its own self, and then you see the self relating to a significant other, one other, and you can see these transitions visually. Every transition is not smooth. You can see the use of gestures like a pointed finger to move from one voice to the other voice or a different stage. You can see the flower, you can see the colors that he used. Helps us to understand the flex and the dynamicity of her world, the subjective world, which is what I find very interesting. The capacity to engage in a mode of thinking that is not diagnostic, not at the level of, let's say, the truth that refers to a condition which is this and not anything else, is challenged. You can have a plurality of that reference if the mode of thinking is beyond the symbolic understanding. And I think one interesting point, I'll talk about the film, and then I'll leave, is that this film is acting as a machine, which is a prediction of thoughts, which is possible if you engage with the text over and over again, over and over again. Even in movies, popular movies which talks about psychological disorders, they are refining the text, they refine reason, they refine the diagnostic knowledge again and again, referring to itself to an extent that anything else is not possible. And here you see something else. We are getting an access, a window, like he used the metaphor window, can act as a glass. So it provides an alternative for us to turn the window into glass and see something that we never wanted to see or willing to see, or there was not even a chance to see. And this production of desires, I mean, I was really sad that the first half ended and then the psychiatric voice or the other voice came. I was just invited and then pushed out. So that's how it affected me. I think one last point with which I'll just end this. I think it raised an important question at the end. For now, which means it's opening up new space. For now, means it's trying to shake that frozen understanding of what this condition is. It is an experience that has to be received at a different level, and it's a preparation of our embodiment in some ways. So to end, the way movement is used, you can see the dance and the jerks and the difficulties of listening to voice from the outside and also expressing that at the embodied level is clearly depicted at the level of visuals. Like you said, there's no dialogue, but it is a dialogue in a sense which does not use words. It's an auto-dialogue, it's a mono-dialogue, it's a dialogue with so many others. So, but it does not use signifiers. With that, I'll probably allow Nitya to share a little more on the film as such, as a text. Yeah.
Thank you, Deepak. Okay, you want to say something?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for the invitation. While watching it and also kind of reflecting on it, what stood out to me is the traditional understanding of mental illness, which is so much embedded in the diagnostic structure and which comes with the whole ideology of correction, that there are symptoms, whether the symptoms are delusional or hallucinatory, and they have to be corrected. And the recent contemporary and the most radical or critical discourse in psychoanalysis especially starts with the whole notion of the subject. And this is the speaking subject who is always mediated by an other. And whether it's a paranoid structure, and Lacan especially talks about mental illness very much embedded in the structures of language. And in the movie, what stood out for me was the aesthetics of the narrative, and that how each utterance seemingly was so fragmented, but for a schizophrenic, I'm using that label because that's what psychiatry recognizes, becomes a complete utterance of the truth. You know, which is not very much like what we understand in the symbolic sense of language, like the language we speak. So one of my friend who happened to meet a diagnosed schizophrenic, she, I remember said that, you know, he said things like he would want to kill his father and he hates his father. And that seemed so problematic to the people, knowing how many cases of crime and murder, whether we understand about familial psychosis in the case of, you know, what we talked about, the Burari case. I mean, definitely the whole system of family was engaged. And that turned out to be such a psychosis. So what I'm trying to suggest here is that the language which the paranoid subject or so-called the schizophrenic, schizoid subject speaks is very important, because it's not layered in the language of the symbolic which we are trained, where so many repressions work, where there is so much of hesitation to utter the truth, you know, that I hate you or I don't like you, things like that. But for the case of schizophrenia, there is the rupture of the symbolic. You know, in Lacanian sense, it's called the real. You know, the real is what is being permeated, whether it's through body, I mean, and it kind of, you know, ruptures the structure. symbolic. I mean, even in the cinema, we saw, how her dance movement was beyond any structure. I mean, that's not how we imagine any dance form to be like. It was so free flowing, or not even subjected to any imagination of the dance form we are used to. We could not put it as, oh, it's this. It's something where she is with the embodiment of her experiences. And what was equally important was the structure of the language, where everything and it's kind of mediated by another, whether it's paranoia, which came out, contemporary psychoanalysis recognizes that, in fact, the relation with the knowledge in itself is a paranoid position. Why? Because the other's desire, or the desire of the other, always is threatening to us. I mean, so it's not just the desire to know, but also the desire not to know. I don't want to know so many truths about myself. Hence, I'm kind of fixated in the symbolic, trapped there. So I think this movie really was so emancipatory that rather than understanding the language of the subject, whether it's paranoid, whether the society can operating in the paranoid frame, we have wars, we have rivalries, but we kind of subject it to an individual who needs to be treated. So I feel, as Erik Erikson says, that I'm just kind of making it overly simplistic, that mental illness, people who carry the symptoms or who speak the truth of the illness are actually the radical dissenters. They are speaking the truth of the society, So that's where I feel sociology, I mean, if you look at her relation, the intimacy, that was very deeply ruptured. The other was not recognizing whatever she said. It was only a negation of, I will leave, I left you for good. What we in different terminology, talk about gaslighting, which is a very clinical framework. But this dialectic, and I feel schizophrenia is somewhere, the position, not as a clinical condition, really breaks free from the other, the language. So yeah, this is what I wanted to say. So more than treating or correcting, it's so much about really understanding the expressions.
Thank you, Nitya. So I would like to take 1 or 2 questions from the audience. So anybody would like to ask?
Can I just take the privilege of asking a question which I wanted to ask?
Yes, yes, of course.
Chandan, this was something that I was trying to make sense, the signifier of the movie, the short film, the name, the choice. In some ways, metaphorically gives out what is hidden. There's a way it reveals something, but what reveals is concealing something. So by revealing this way, it is opening up a new possibility for what was concealed. So I want to know what went behind the choice of that name of the movie and why it was lost.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. There are I'll 2 parts to it, to the answer. Earlier, the film was titled, right till the very end, it was titled Never Cursed. And the entire idea behind it was that I mean, what the expression means, never cursed. Like, even if you're going through the worst through your life, there is still a certain gift in the act of living. But I kept thinking through the film that, we never know her name. In the writing of it, I was clear that we should not know her name, because generally, it was this, again, what idea was very simple, that, people are reduced to numbers or their situations. Instead of knowing, you will say that, okay, patient number this or patient number that. Often even in hospitals, you see that happening. Forget psychiatric institutions, just regular hospitals. But I thought she should have a name. And how this name came about was, I was, prior to this film, before COVID hit, I was trying to do a work around obituaries. And the work was around an obituary I read in a newspaper, in a local newspaper in Goa. And I was very, sort of intrigued by that obituary, because generally obituaries are written by people who know the disease, right? It's family, friends, loved ones. But this obituary felt very different. It felt as if the person who passed away does not know the person who has written this obituary. But this person who's framed and published this obituary was very well aware of this person. So it could also be a case of maybe someone who's stalking this person for decades, maybe. But it was very moving and beautiful, and her name was Alma. So I spent 1 year looking for these two people, and the person who had dedicated that obituary, his name was VK, which is the postcard I showed here. So when I started tracing, a lot of my work also is about like just tracing unknown leads. I'm just very moved by the idea of like working like a detective and just looking for strangers. So then I checked what Alma means, and I felt it really, really fits the protagonist of my film, someone who's kindred and generous and has a lot to give despite everything that she has gone through. So that's how the title of the film came, and I thought, let me just reveal it at the end in her voice instead of with her face, because it's a representation of not just her but several other people. Just that idea of someone who could love with all that heart and also be broken to that extent, and yet kind of be resilient to, which I think most of us are. All of us have gone through it to different degrees. So yeah.
Chandan?
Hi Chandan, hi again. Loved it. As a filmmaker, I loved it. As a woman, I'm questioning you. Do you have, and you also, Deepak, do you find the percentage of women more in schizophrenia? Why did you choose a woman as your main character? Because I was just wondering, would it be the same if a man was going through it? Because it is so beautiful. I don't think a person has to be schizophrenic. It can be, or are we all schizophrenic? If you understand what I'm trying to ask. Because it is so sensitive. Everyone goes through this sensitivity at many given points of time in your one life, this timeline that is going. You feel so many moments, so many dark moments where you're doing that dance in your head, or you're listening to so many other voices and it's kind of silencing your own. And I think homemakers, especially women who have not stepped out into the other side, for me it's a film for any homemaker who has not been out of that glass. And from this side, it's patriarchy that is deciding and saying, hey, this is this patient. Yeah. It's very, very compelling. It's very moving. And I absolutely enjoyed it. I would love to see it probably another 10, 20 times, So what are your thoughts? I mean, why a woman character? And for you, do you have more schizophrenic patients who are women? Yeah.
So just in the interest of time, we'll take a few questions, and because we just get a chance to have everybody. Does anybody has anything? All right. Okay. One. Side. Okay. Before I just give in the mic. So I just one specific thing that I saw a lot of Lacan, and I'm very happy you mentioned Lacan in the way this is sort of moving, across. And one of the things I was would be very interesting for you to reflect, because you're looking at from also a lot of photography use of colors, that the question I asked, use of red at the end towards particularly, is the blurring of non-duality that you're very conscious of throughout this, that where a lot of discussions around schizophrenia is about splitting images, and you're actually just completely reversing that of blurring duality in sort of a very linear frame. So that might be interesting to sort of reflect. Yeah, and then if you could just...
I just have a simple question. As I've seen this film, it explores the deep emotions. I want to know, as a director point of view, what message or feeling you want your audience to take away from this.
I have only one word answer. I really don't know about the numbers. I did not really see this character as women or men. Unfortunately, I did not have that perspective. But what I saw is probably the other half of the question. All of us are schizophrenic. That is an interesting question for me, because I don't know what the number says. I don't know if Nitya knows or someone else knows. It is a potential possibility for all our subjects to experience the schizophrenic potential of knowing ourselves deeply. In this case, the way this mode of thinking through its film that has given access is the flow of desires. If you consider society as a machine that produces desires in you, capitalism produces certain desires whose origin is not you and your unconscious, but here you can see a subject and the desire and the flow of desire in spite of others, in spite of the significant other constituting you. It flows from the unconscious of that subject that was depicted, which is challenging the ideology, challenging the other, challenging in some ways not let the other completely consume me and say, here I am, that you can't totally determine. That's my short response.
Yeah, I'll take all the questions in chronological order. Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think there could be several answers to it, but I'll try and focus on the ones that mean the most to me. I think COVID was a period where everyone went through a lot, and that time I remember just before I decided to make a film, I was out of a relationship which felt like I was relieved to be out of it, and I really wanted to make something coming from it, But when I started thinking of the idea, I also started thinking of the other person, that if maybe I had a horrible time in it, she also had a horrible time in it, and just as a theoretical exercise, I thought that why not remove myself from that equation and see what was happening. And then I realized it's very difficult as an artist or as a writer to write, for a man to write women, because, and then suddenly I was going through all the films I might have seen in my life, and I was thinking that, a lot of things that I thought I took for granted or I never noticed, they started coming out. And then it became almost like a challenge for me that let me write a character, let me see if I can, write a woman, instead of a man. And also it is also very much of a reflection of how things are, because the psychiatrist inside is debating and questioning, or even the imagination of a partner is the word she used was it's gaslighting, right? He's trying to basically tell her that her hurt has made her stronger. He's trying to flip the narrative, but whereas hurt is hurt, sometimes you're just hurt, deeply hurt. There is nothing else to it, if you are cheated upon or lied or deceived, that is the truth of what it is, and perhaps that's what she went through. But that gaslighting is something which is very normal, which is across genders also, it's not just that men are doing it or women are doing it. So that was one aspect that, as a filmmaker also, as a writer also, because you start with screenplays, so you have to imagine a character, you have to live that character. And for me, it was also somehow tying back to my, I think it was somehow strangely tying back to my mother, who has a very interesting history. I mean, I picked up photography. My father still thinks I picked it up from him, who was a hobbyist. But it was my mother who was the secret photographer in the family. So she did so many photographs of us as children, and my father still doesn't know about it. It was this hidden secret between us. So till now my father believes, and it was a conscious decision, like it was like a secret we want to keep to ourselves. So till now he keeps thinking that, and when I see her, I realize that there is, I mean, to me, she was much more of an artist than my father could ever be. I mean, he got me technically involved in photography, but I think it was my mother's eyes, just the way she looked at the world, the fragility with which she looked, moved me enough to take this as a. So I think it was strangely tying back to that. So and I think I saw my mother in when I was writing this film, this character, and all her turmoil in her everyday life of running a family in a very small house in all circumstances that are alienating and hostile, and yet deeply protecting this artist in her, which never wanted to work for with the idea of showing, she in fact worked from at the opposite end to never reveal what was deepest to her, which is her photography, and that is something that I imbibed. And I make handmade books. I make books. I make a lot of photo books, but they're all handmade with the idea that I'll only get to see them in my lifetime, But because I took it up professionally, I also have to publish work. But personally, I don't like it. I just like taking a lot of photographs and hiding them in the pages of a book. So I think it's for me connecting with my mother deeply.
Because I had played all kinds of roles, including homemaker, including that struggle, that conflict. Yeah. So if you remove schizophrenia, if you remove the title, if you remove this panel, it's a great film. It's a beautiful struggle, it's a beautiful conflict, right? And the way the man analyzes it, unfortunately, I mean, that's how you picked your characters. If you would put a woman on this side and put a man on that side, it will not be judged so much, but I love it because it's very normal and natural, at least now. Yeah. And I hope by the time my daughter grows up, the roles could be reversed. Yeah. In a very natural, organic way. Yeah, that's true. Coming to your question, give me like a few seconds, I'm just running it. Yeah, the non-duality of it, I think for me, I am someone who always tries to, like when I was, studying philosophy, I didn't understand most of it, It's only later when I graduated and I was working as a photographer that things started to make sense to me. So I used to think, we're studying Descartes and we're studying the Cartesian method he's invented, and what does that even mean? And then I remember years later, I was watching a documentary somewhere which was on the vivisection of animals and insects and all of that. And that's when it struck me that, okay, it was so relevant what I was studying, because suddenly when Descartes created the Cartesian coordinate, he spoke of the mind and the body separately. So if the mind and the body is separate, the body can suffer, but the mind will live, which is what also Oppenheimer alludes to when he made his speech. So I was not surprised that the atom bomb was dropped on, on two entire cities, because the entire idea is that the body will perish. That's what, So duality was something that created, for me, suddenly I realized, wow, so much violence can just be justified at a very philosophical level. Forget all the other concerns. The fact that the two are separate. And that's when it sort of got me back to
parts of Indian philosophy or philosophies that didn't recognize this duality but integrated both the mind and the body together. So with this film, that was the idea. That was somewhere, matlab, it was always in the subconscious, perhaps, you know, until this question, because which it is with a lot of art, you know. You're just living with a lot of ideas and then suddenly it comes out. So perhaps that flip happens from there, that there is no duality. I mean, for me, the psychiatrist is as much as a patient, because he's a patient of two things. One is his own scholarship, and the second is of his own inability to go into those grays, to accept freedom from different spaces, to have a new definition of freedom. So to me, they are, you know, he's no different. He is in his own prison. If he calls that, if he thinks that she is in a prison of some kind, so is he. Yeah. Now the question is, whose prison is worth living in? And for me, I'm clear that I would rather live in her prison than his. So I hope I answered that question. Yeah, maybe even I'll have to see it. Yeah, the last question I'll just answer. So there were only two concerns I had, and they all came from my life. It was nothing to do with the film, you know. One concern was that if the act of loving can cause repeated pain, then why we as human beings do it again and again? Why do we not refrain from loving someone, knowing that you could have just maybe endless heartbreaks in it, you know? Why? Like that's I used to always think, you know, as an artist, as a person, in every possible role that I could be, you know, it always fascinated me. And the second was that how does one decide with that kind of steadiness that a particular mental state is categorized as normal and the other is seen as an illness? Like, is there a definitive way? Is there a definitive way? And I don't have an answer to this. Again, for me, both are questions that I keep looking at and exploring, because you'll talk to different stakeholders, you'll have different answers to it. So it's sometimes it's just about being with those questions. So that's where I am right now. But maybe 10 years later, I'll have more information on the second aspect of my answer.
Thank you so much, Chandan and Deepak, Nitya as well. So, yeah. So after, so we will be coming back at 2:30 most probably. Okay. So there is a half an hour for lunch.